The Innkeeper by Life Sketcher. Chapter 81 Si humans. Lex stood patiently as he awaited the arriving guests. This was by far the busiest day his inn had ever seen, and he had to be ready to face any kind of hurdle. He would create more rooms, rent more AI assistants, or do whatever else was needed to make sure everything went smoothly. A bright light flashed and Lex saw a few familiar faces. Brother Chen and Blaine appeared, followed by a lady who bore a sharp resemblance to Chen. Innkeeper, the two soldiers acknowledged together as soon as they saw Lex. The girl looked at him with curiosity. "Welcome back," said Lex with a smile. "I did not expect to see you so soon. Were you able to find your caravan?" Lex had heard enough of their conversations with Phallic to know a bit about them and what they were going through. "Yes, fortunately they were all safe and we were able to locate them. This is my sister. I brought her here because I wanted her to become familiar with the inn. I hope you find it to your liking," he said, looking at the girl. Name, Lily. Age, 24. Sex, female. Cultivation details, Chi training 7th realm. Species, human. Midnight and prestige level, 1. "Would you like me to show you around?" Brother Chen and Blaine looked each other in the eye and instantly knew what the other was thinking. No thank you. You must be busy, we can show her around." "Very well. Give me a call if you need me." The three walked towards the manor, leaving Lex behind. When they had walked some distance, Lily whispered, "I've never seen you behave like that. Is that guy so scary?" "You have no idea," her brother replied gravely. "Last time we were here we met another guest who was so powerful that we cannot even guess his realm, and even that guy was polite to the innkeeper. He can open portals all over the universe to retrieve his guests from whichever planet they're on. I dare not even think how powerful he is." Lily gulped, as if understanding what her brother meant. "But even so," said Blaine, "he is running this inn and takes care of all his guests very well. I cannot guess what is going on in the mind of someone that powerful, but as long as we don't get on his bad side we'll be fine." Lex, who was completely not eavesdropping on their conversation, accidentally overheard what they were saying and chuckled to himself. "Ah, it's nice to be respected. Or is it feared?" With all his guests taking care of themselves, Lex turned his attention to the napping turtle. A part of him wanted to let the turtle sleep, but God only knew how long a 2,000-year-old baby's nap would be. "Wake up," Lex said gently, but with his voice infused with the power of his suit. The turtle that had no name lazily opened its eyes, but as soon as it saw its new location it jolted awake. It looked around confused, and kept sniffing the air. "Welcome to the Midnight Inn. I did not want to disturb your sleep, but I thought you might find it more restful in a room." The turtle wore an alarmed look on its face, and hearing Lex its worry did not lessen but increased. "Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. You silly humans really give me a lot of trouble," the turtle said, before it started walking hurriedly towards the forest. "Do you know all the animals here are hungry, and are forcefully feeding on spirit energy to survive," the turtle lectured Lex as it paced forward. How the turtle knew this was a mystery, but it was confident that it was right. "There are no insects around, no worms, no seeds. What are they supposed to feed on?" "Oh you silly humans, don't you know you're supposed to feed someone when they're hungry?" Upon hearing the turtle, Lex was embarrassed and alarmed. He had gotten the animals from the system, so he naturally assumed the system would feed them as well. He never considered the lack of their natural food in the environment. Suddenly it occurred to him that the reason Helen might be so popular with the animals was because she was probably feeding them. He purchased various kinds of animal food and mentally commanded Velma to feed the animals every day. No wait, Velma was usually busy with guests and other duties. Maybe he should get another assistant to help with the animals and maybe even the environment. As Lex was thinking of a solution, he did not realize he had followed the turtle into the forest, nor had he realized that wherever the turtle would step wild grass would grow. Mushrooms, small shrubs and different wild plants all started appearing in a trail behind the turtle, and before long small animals could be seen eating them. Lex was woken from his thoughts, however, when he realized that the turtle had walked directly in a straight line right to the greenhouse. The array seemed to have no effect on it. Before he could say anything though, he heard a worried voice. "Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear, you silly silly human. You are drowning the plants, they don't need so much water, and the soil is all wrong. Too much fertilizer can be poisonous, not all plants need the same things," the turtle told the gardener, and started using its ability to rearrange the plants. "Get away you fat lizard," the gardener said angrily, "you're ruining my arrangements. When the plants grow, their arrangement will form words that will form poetry. You're ruining my poetry." No, silly human, these plants cannot be so close together or their roots will harm each other." The gardener and the turtle started arguing with each other, both trying to determine how the garden should be managed, leaving Lex standing there with his mouth hanging open. "Close your mouth or a fly will go in," said Mary, who appeared wearing an amused look. There are no flies in the inn, Lex retorted, but he closed his mouth. This was the first time he was seeing an AI showing some personality. He did not know they could do that. He was under the impression they were like those AI assistants he saw in TV shows that only do the task they're told. You should hire the turtle to maintain the greenhouse. It has a strong affinity to nature, and could speed up the plant's growth. Lex's eyes lit up at the idea, but before he could make the offer he heard the turtle say, "Oh dear, oh dear. Such a wonderful garden, I can't let a silly human ruin it. I better look after it." System notification. The Galactic Sovereign Turtle has hired itself as an employee. All permanent employees must have a residence. Automatically purchasing employee residence. 1500 MP residence purchased, please allocate residence entrance. Lex's mouth dropped open once again at the sudden events. What the hell was happening? Mary burst out laughing at Lex's impression, but when she received his glare she stopped laughing to explain. Well, more like she eventually stopped laughing to explain. You're probably wondering why all the steps for hiring were skipped, like giving it the platinum key and going through the test. Exactly. The platinum key is for people you want to employ out in the various worlds. If whoever you want to employ is already at the inn, then you can make an offer to them for the job directly. Normally that would then proceed to the test, but a galactic sovereign turtle, even an infant one, is too overqualified for such a simple position. Since the turtle directly expressed its intention to work, and you expressed your interest in hiring it, the process was skipped. Lex kept glaring at her. The explanation she gave made sense, kind of, but he had a strong feeling she was just making an excuse and the system acted on its own because it didn't trust him enough to hire the turtle. He walked up to the turtle and said, "Since you are interested in joining my inn, I would like to welcome you. I have prepared a residence for you and connected the entrance to the greenhouse." He pointed in a corner where a giant double door had appeared connected to a massive tree. Lex had spent a little MP to make the entrance look like it was inside of a tree since he thought the turtle might like it. He was not sure exactly what kind of habitat turtles, especially galactic ones, liked. The galactic sovereign turtle nodded in understanding. Of course the system hadn't forcefully hired it, and the turtle had received its contract directly in its mind. It didn't bother with the contract though and directly accepted. It didn't have complex desires or needs, all it saw was that this place had the potential for a good garden, and the turtle wanted to tend to it. "No, Innkeeper," the gardener let out a sorrowful roar, "you must not let it touch the greenhouse. It has no style, no sense of aesthetic. It will ruin everything." The gardener looked like a child complaining to his parent. Well, he was only a few days old, so technically both the gardener and the turtle were babies by their own standards. Chapter 82 Outer Beauty and Inner Peace. While the various new guests were roaming around the inn, Helen was exploring the place herself as well. At first she was hesitant to move around the inn lest she run into someone who recognizes her, but now with her glasses she moved around without worry. She noticed every few days some changes would be made to the inn's environment or new buildings would be added, and she liked exploring them. Everything was improving all the time, and the already pleasant environment was getting even better. Previously she felt that some places of the inn would be too quiet, which would make it eerie. However, one day randomly more birds and small animals appeared, so if nothing else you would always hear the flapping or singing of birds. A few moments ago she had even seen a massive turtle hurrying across the grounds next to the innkeeper. She supposed that was one of the animals from a different planet because she had never seen a turtle that big on Earth. Currently she was heading towards a new building she saw appear opposite to the training room. While on her way she noticed that today seemed to be relatively busy for the inn. She saw William Bentham again, leading a group of followers towards the recovery room. She saw two intimidating men walking beside a woman like her bodyguards. Most interestingly, she saw what appeared to be a mother chasing her daughter with a bedroom slipper in her hand, with Gerard following the pair in a golf cart. The daughter kept screaming, "I'm going to date an Olin. I'm going to date an Olin, I've already seen it." Every time she yelled she would antagonize her mother even more, which would cause the daughter to laugh. Although the daughter was the one laughing, Gerard, who was driving behind the pair, seemed to be the one enjoying the most. Helen chuckled as she thought about it, and continued on her journey. She was quite noticeable as she was followed by an ostentation of peacocks wherever she went. She received a few glances from the new guests, but the glasses gave her the confidence to ignore them. When she finally arrived near the training room, she was surprised to find that the new building was a barber shop. She didn't even need to guess, the spinning barber's pole outside was very distinctive and telling. This surprised her, as she was expecting something more exciting. Everything at the inn so far seemed targeted towards cultivation. The meditation room, training room, recovery room and mystery trial were all good examples of this. Compared to their utilitarian purposes, this seemed almost mundane. But she didn't underestimate it just because it seemed normal. She went inside to see a young man, probably around her age, excitedly looking through all the cupboards. When she entered the shop, a bell hung above the door rang, alerting the young man of her presence. He was startled at the noise, but quickly his excitement returned as he looked at Helen. "Welcome," he said jovially as he pulled her in. "Welcome to Harry's. Or wait, Harry's barber shop. No wait," he became distracted and started mumbling to himself about the name. "Is this your shop?" Helen asked, analyzing the young man. "Yes. Yes, of course it is. Have a seat, what would you like? Since you're my first customer, there's no charge." "No, I don't want to have anything done," Helen clarified. "I was just curious about the new building and wanted to see what it was." "Oh," said Harry, his excitement dimming noticeably. "Are you sure you don't want to try anything? Trust me, I'm very good. And I won't charge, promise." Helen suddenly felt awkward. It was clear to her that Harry really wanted her to have something done, and was looking at her with longing eyes. She didn't want to offend anyone at the inn, so she reluctantly said, "Fine, why don't you give me a little trim? Not too much, mind you." Helen's hair was already short, barely reaching her shoulders, and she didn't want to cut it much shorter, but she thought there wouldn't be much harm in trying out the shop. Something at the Midnight Inn clearly couldn't be normal. She took a seat and Harry stood behind her excitedly as stared at her face in the mirror. He was deciding what sort of look would suit her most, but he did not realize that his eyes started emitting a purple glow as he did. Under his glare, Helen didn't feel uncomfortable, and instead seemed to enter a trance. She started hearing her own previous thoughts in her head, as if they were being replayed. At some point Harry decided what he wanted to do and grabbed a spray bottle and sprayed her hair. No one noticed that the spray bottle seemed to just appear in Harry's hand, or that as the water touched her hair it seemed to wash away some of the thoughts full of self-doubt that she was hearing in her head. A floating comb appeared and started brushing her hair. As if by magic or some sorcery, not only did the brush untangle all her hair in a single stroke without having to pull or tug, it rearranged her thoughts so that they became more organized. Lately her thoughts would bounce from Alexander to her family to the assassination attempt to her unknown future. Everything was full of uncertainty and she had trouble thinking straight, but now the randomness of her thoughts started disappearing. Harry himself did not notice that as he worked he started mumbling incantations or that two pairs of scissors appeared in the air around him. Both the scissors started cutting rapidly, yet very little hair was actually being cut. If someone could peer into Helen's mind and visualize it as a garden, then they would notice that anxiety was growing in that garden like weed. Yet each time the scissors snipped, some of that anxiety was cut away. Slowly and steadily, Helen's appearance started to change, and if this were a video game instead of real life, +1 charm would be seen floating above her head every few minutes. Yet the biggest change was in her mind. Mortals called it mental health and cultivators called it inner demons, but regardless of whatever one called it, Helen's state was improving. Slowly and steadily, she was receiving a makeover that would change her entire life. She was achieving both outer beauty and inner peace. Lex was chuckling to himself as he walked out of the forest. He had gotten the gardener and turtle to agree to working with each other, but even as he left the greenhouse he could hear them bickering. It reminded him of his youth, when he was a kid and used to fight with his elder sister, Belle. Despite her feminine name, she was a real tomboy and the two used to fight a lot. He had also given the turtle a name, which the turtle completely ignored and did not acknowledge at all. No, he did not name the turtle Leonardo or Michelangelo. He was not about to follow that cliché. He was determined to follow in the footsteps of all the main characters of all the cultivation and system novels he had read before, and named the turtle Little Black. The turtle was neither little nor black, but those main characters never seemed to care, and neither would Lex. He was slightly annoyed when the system didn't reflect that name in the turtle's status, but he would call it by that name regardless. Lex was in an unusually good mood, and suddenly he felt even better when he found out even more guests were about to enter the inn. He teleported to the entrance just in time to see Alexander appearing with 2 men and a woman behind him. The entire group looked quite young. He guessed they were his friends or class fellows. At least until he read their statuses. Name, Rorik Morrison. Age, 48. Sex, male. Cultivation details, golden core mid. Species, human. Midnight and prestige level, 1. Remarks, this fellow seems to have accidentally tucked his shirt into his undergarments. Name, Brandon Morrison. Age, 104. Sex, male. Cultivation details. Spirit cultivation, insufficient authority. Body cultivation, golden core peak. Species, human. Midnight and prestige level, 1. Remarks, the real OG. Name, Audrey Morrison. Age, 101. Sex, female. Cultivation details. Spirit cultivation, golden core peak. Body cultivation, golden core peak. Species, human. Midnight and prestige level, 1. Remarks, extremely, extremely dangerous. Host must maintain distance at all times. The system will not associate with the host if he falls in love with someone 4 times his age. Lex felt his lips about to twitch, but he controlled himself. He could no longer let the system's remarks affect him. Yet as he was ruminating over the system's remarks and the difference between their looks and their actual age, the 3 Morrisons who had entered the inn for barely a second froze. Then they looked at each other with disbelief and excitement in their eyes, as if to confirm what they were feeling wasn't just an illusion. Alexander noticed his family's strange behavior and asked, "What is it?" "I can break through to the nascent realm here," replied Rorik. Chapter 83, A Light Heart. "Are you sure?" Alexander asked excitedly. "You can break through to the nascent realm here?" "Yes," answered Brandon with gleaming eyes. "The environment here is like inside the fusion chamber except without all the danger and instability. I can feel the bottleneck for my body cultivation loosening. In fact, even my spiritual cultivation is already improving. This place is definitely not in our solar system." The Morrisons all shared a knowing look, as they tried to process the ramifications of what they had just learnt. An environment which would allow cultivators to break through above the golden core was absent on Earth. Even the minor realms that opened up on Earth had a similar environment, and did not allow for such growth. The reason for why exactly no one could break through was unknown, but it was generally agreed that Earth was lacking something. It was important to note, only humans suffered this blockage and beasts were often able to ascend to the higher realm. As for why the beasts never took over Earth since they had an advantage, that was a secret few knew. A secret almost no one knew was that on Earth currently there were 5 nascent realm cultivators. Each of the 5 had ascended through unique chances or coincidences that could not be replicated. Brandon had made the breakthrough in a specially designed chamber called the fusion chamber. The reason for that name was because the chamber was bombarded with concentrated spiritual energy and radiation from several nuclear reactors. The theory was that the radiation could be treated using spirit arrays and technology to convert it into extremely concentrated spiritual energy which would create the necessary prerequisite to breakthrough. The idea was inspired by nuclear power plants. Yet while Brandon had succeeded in breaking through, everyone else who had tried so far died instead, which is why it was not an idea that was being widely used. The Morrison family was conducting various types of research on how to stabilize the energy in the chamber, or to increase the efficiency of the conversion of energy. Yet that was all redundant now. The inn gave them a convenient place to make their breakthroughs. All their current expansion plans, as well as their plans to snub out the little rebellion that was being planned on Earth, had to be put on hold. "I'm glad you're enjoying yourselves," said the innkeeper, who had been standing there for a while now. "If you want to cultivate or break through a realm, I recommend you try out our meditation room. Its environment is very conducive to cultivation." "Hello, innkeeper," said Alexander, who remembered just realized that they had been ignoring their host in their excitement. "This is my father, Rorik. These are my grandparents, Brandon and Audrey." The family politely greeted the innkeeper. "Welcome," replied the innkeeper. "I hope you find my little establishment to your liking. If you need anything, do not hesitate to ask." "How is Helen doing? Is she feeling all right?" Alexander asked, concerned about his friend. Lex mentally swept the inn for her and found her at the barber shop. "She is currently receiving a makeover at our barber shop. Would you like me to take you over?" "That would be great, thank you." Lex started leading the family towards the barber shop at a gentle pace. They looked around where they walked, but with the power of the suit he could feel them using their spiritual sense to observe the place. "Alexander tells me that you receive guests from all over the universe and not just Earth. Is that true?" asked Rorik. "Yes, of course. The Midnight Inn can be accessed from anywhere in the universe. Even right now we have guests from multiple planets in our grounds. Everyone comes with their own purposes, and we try to fulfill all their needs." He was monitoring all his guests with his powers right now, as there were a lot of them and he would need to manage any situation that came up. Will had led his group to the recovery room, so he quickly told Velma to go there mentally in case they needed to use any of the rooms. He was short-handed and thought of just hiring another AI for the recovery room, but he only had 2126 MP on hand at the moment and didn't want to spend the last of it on another big expense. He had to leave himself some buffer space, especially considering Marlowe was consuming MP every day. Our recovery room is usually a big hit amongst guests. Even Alexander found use for it with Helen being poisoned. We have meditation rooms for anyone who wants to cultivate, and training rooms for anyone who wants to hone their combat skills. We have a mystery trial as well, that tests the guest's greatest skill whatever it may be. Anyone who can complete the trial can receive an award, though that may be harder than it seems. It is completely safe though, so there is no need to worry. Other than that we, of course, have our inn where guests can stay to rest and recuperate. Soon we will have even more attractions, so keep visiting if you want to keep up with the excitement. Would it be possible for us to meet some of the guests from other planets? We've never met someone from the rest of the universe before, it would be an enlightening experience. Lex looked back at Brandon, who had made the request. His request made sense, who wouldn't be curious in this situation? Yet Lex was slightly concerned. He did not want anyone to get into a fight over anything since Lex had the lowest cultivation here and wouldn't be able to stop anyone. I can naturally introduce you to some of our guests. If they are so inclined, you can chat with them as much as you want about the rest of the universe. But if they are not up to it, I hope you respect their wishes. Disturbing other guests and causing issues can get you banned from the inn. This family wanted to cultivate at the inn, so naturally a ban was the greatest threat to them. I will make sure my parents behave, said Rorik very seriously. The look on his face was grave, as if he was embarking on a suicide mission. By this time they reached the barber shop and entered to find Harry working very seriously on Helen's hair. A floating towel would dab Harry's forehead from time to time to wipe off his sweat, because while all the actual work was being done by the floating utensils, Harry was exhausting himself by simply reciting his incantations. The family looked at Helen curiously, but Audrey was the one who immediately noticed something unusual. She had seen this girl, or at least pictures of this girl, before. Although it could be said that she was a pretty lass, she would not stand out in a crowd. Right now, however, she was radiating charm and charisma that would catch anyone's eye. The strange thing was, she didn't look any different. Her skin wasn't any clearer or fairer, she was wearing no makeup, her hairstyle was fairly ordinary. The source of the change was her expression. It was as if she was free and happy, from the bottom of her heart. It was such a simple thing, but the soft smile of her lips was pure enough to touch people's hearts. Finally Harry finished, and threw himself on the sofas behind himself. He was completely out of breath, as if he had run a marathon and could barely stand on his own. Get some rest, Harry, I think you've done enough for the day. Harry smiled weakly at the innkeeper and said, yes, that was more exhausting than I imagined. But at least let me see the result of my hard work first. With that the two looked towards Helen, who finally woke up from her trance. She felt a strange sense of lightness. For a moment, she felt like a child again, pure and happy with no worry or care in the world. She looked at herself in the mirror to find that instead of her hair getting shorter, it had somehow gotten longer. It fell halfway down her back, but with a natural flow that looked elegant. She smiled, completely unaware that she captivated everyone in the room. Helen, how are you feeling? Asked Alexander. She hadn't noticed the extra people in the room, but the young man's voice alerted her to their presence. When she looked at Alexander she found that curiously, she didn't feel anything. Previously, whenever she looked at him she would feel love and longing, along with the bitter pain of knowing that they were never meant to be, as well as a little hope, deep inside her heart that maybe someday, somehow they could be together. Yet now, looking at him she felt the same way she did when looking at just another friend. Who could have blamed her for falling in love with him? Or maybe it was infatuation instead. He was a handsome and brilliant young man, polite yet assertive, strong yet sensible. He had achievements people could only dream of and a destiny that eclipsed anyone around her. Naturally she, along with most of the girls in her class, gravitated towards Alexander. But now suddenly she no longer felt that longing. She simply felt that even if he was the best person in the whole universe, if he was not the one for her then it did not matter. She would only give her heart to someone who appreciated and loved her. This did not mean that she disliked Alexander or liked him less. It simply meant she could finally simply be friends with him, without other thoughts. I'm great, Alexander. I'm great, the girl replied. Chapter 84 The Bold and the Broke. Alexander was relieved to hear that Helen was doing well. I had the Sigmund family investigated while I was away. Things are not as straightforward as they appear to be. I'll share the report with you once we return to Mars. Okay, she responded simply. She was curious to know the details of what actually happened, and if her parents were involved in the decision to use her in the assassination. Alexander and Helen were catching up and his seniors were watching from a distance, his grandpa smirking. Lex went to help Harry up, as he could not even stand on his own. That really took a lot out of you. In the future don't use your new heritage without training yourself first. If you are not careful, you could hurt yourself. Harry's eyes were filled with excitement even if his body was trembling from weakness. What he had done with Helen was only the tip of the iceberg of all the new knowledge he had received. He knew his weakness was a result of him not training his body and soul enough, but the heritage also let him know how exactly he should be training. In the future what he could do would be even more. He especially couldn't wait to go and try out his newfound powers on Earth, right up until the innkeeper said, for now don't use your heritage on Earth. Your planet is more complicated than it appears. I will have someone compile some things you should familiarize yourself with first, lest you accidentally get into trouble. Harry nodded repeatedly as the innkeeper helped him to the entrance of his own residence. He stumbled in and collapsed on the mattress, asleep as soon as he shut his eyes. When Lex returned to the Morrison family, he saw the two soldiers and the girl from Vegas Minima outside the shop window and thought it the perfect time to introduce the two groups. "I see some of our guests from a different planet just outside. Would you like me to introduce you?" "Please," replied Rorik. As Lex led the group out, he spent 100 MP on a one-day universal language translator that applied to the whole inn. Cultivators with a higher level could communicate through their spiritual sense, but not everyone could. To facilitate communication between guests from different planets, Lex would have to buy this translator. A permanent translator instead of a one-day one would cost 100,000 MP. Lex could definitely put off buying it. "Blaine, Chen, Lily, it's good that I ran into you. There's someone I want to introduce you to." The Morrison family stood behind him and observed their counterparts silently, while the three from Vegas Minima also looked at the family as they immediately understood that they were the ones they were being introduced to. "These are some of my guests from a different planet than yours. This is their first opportunity to meet someone from outside their own solar system, so I thought I would introduce them to you. I think both of you will find an exchange very beneficial." Blaine and Chen exchanged a look. They paid great detail to whatever the innkeeper said, and him mentioning that meeting these people could be beneficial seemed like him hinting at something. They nodded to one another, as if they were both accepting a mission. Just as the soldiers were about to introduce themselves, Lex felt another guest about to enter the inn. It was unfortunate. He wanted to be present when these groups from different worlds met and see what they talked about, but a new guest would take priority. "Please excuse me while I go tend to another matter. If you need any help, just call out." With that, Lex disappeared. Helen and the soldiers were already used to the innkeeper appearing and disappearing as he wished, but the Morrison family was caught by surprise. But that worked to their advantage as the soldiers relaxed when they saw that this other group was intimidated by the innkeeper as well. "My name is Blaine, this is Brother Chen and Lily. It's a pleasure to meet you." Lex appeared at the entrance once again, ready to greet his guest, but before the guest, Mary appeared before him. "Lex, you need to listen to me very carefully. When this next guest appears, you will receive a quest. It's very, very important that you receive at least an S rank on that quest." Lex was taken aback by Mary's sudden serious demeanor. "Why? Is something the matter?" "Just trust me," is all she said before disappearing again. A giant golden door appeared and from it entered a middle-aged man. When he crossed the door he felt as if time froze and in his mind he received a prompt, "Would you like to hide your identity?" Intrigued, he selected yet. A pair of aviator sunglasses appeared in front of him and somehow he knew that if he wore those his entire appearance and aura would be hidden. After he put those on and exited, his attire had changed from a prison garb to skinny jeans, a black t-shirt and a leather jacket. Of course he was wearing aviators as well. The many chains that hung from his body changed their appearance from bindings to jewelry. As soon as the man appeared, true to what Mary said, a new quest appeared. New quest: 20 guests have appeared together at the inn for the first time. Instead of waiting for them to come to you with their needs, it's time you do something for them proactively. Prepare an event for your guests to participate in. Quest time: start the event in 2 weeks. Quest reward: subject to change based on guest's response. Quest failure punishment: -5000 MP. Remarks: why have you stopped offering your guests drinks when they enter the inn? Go back to college and take a few hospitality courses. Lex raised an eyebrow. This quest was interesting, and it gave him some time to prepare as well. He would have to plan this carefully, especially with Mary's reminder of stating its importance as well. But for now he should take care of his guest first. He checked the man's status. Name, %error %end. Age, %error %end. Sex, %error %end. Cultivation details, %error %end, sealed. Species, %error %end. Midnight and prestige level, 1. Remarks: this man is very suspicious. Charge him extra MP. Even with the host attire helping him to maintain his expression, Lex could not keep himself from raising an eyebrow. He had never come across a situation where the inn could not read someone's status. Even with Bautet and Phallic, the inn only told him that his authority was insufficient to view their information instead of reporting an error message. Of course, to the man walking the gesture of an eyebrow being raised represented something else. He suspected the man had seen through his details, and he was not surprised. The man standing there as if waiting for him gave off an aura that even he had never felt before. "Welcome, guest, to the Midnight Inn. You may call me Innkeeper," Lex said warmly as he readied the self-defense butter knife should anything go wrong. Even the system thought he was suspicious, so Lex had to be careful. Whenever you feel tired, wherever you are in the universe, the Midnight Inn will be your best refuge. "Thank you. You may call me John." May I ask, did you open the portal to lead me here? Lex shook his head. The midnight inn finds weary travelers on its own, so that they can come rest and recuperate before they may return on their journey. Of course, we have many other services than just offering a place to stay. It is up to our guests what services they wish to avail. The middle-aged man smiled and took a deep breath. It had been a long time since he breathed in fresh air. He glanced at the scenery around him before turning his attention to the innkeeper. The innkeeper was the most imminent threat to the man, and in his current condition he could not defend himself at all. He had to stabilize his situation before anything else, as he did not want the innkeeper to send him back to the ship he came from. This is an embarrassing question, but I assume you charge your guests to stay at your inn. Naturally. Our services are the best in the universe, and so are our rates. Lex, while still wary of the man, was also amused. Who knew that the first bargainer he would come across would be such an enigmatic figure? Well, there's a bit of an issue. You see, I was robbed of all my possessions and don't currently have any money on me. Is there any other way I can pay to stay here? Lex frowned as he looked at the man. He was not expecting him to have no money at all. Don't dismiss him directly, said Mary, who reappeared. While there is no official way to temporarily hire people, can't you just pay for his stay with your own MP? Ask him what services he can provide. Maybe he'll have some useful abilities or skills. Lex put on the face of an intimidating landlord and said, What can you do for me? If you have any skills that I find useful, I don't mind giving you a part-time job. Chapter 85. Slap you with money. John stood silently as he thought of which of his skills he could offer up. Someone with his life experiences was not lacking in personal skill or ability, but he had to pick the right one. Lex waited patiently for him as the man ruminated. Even if Mary hadn't told him to give John a chance, he would have. He wanted to learn more about this person that even the system couldn't identify. He was more than sure that John was just an alias and was not this man's real name. Finally the man decided and said, I have extensive knowledge about various cultivation techniques and styles. I can custom create spirit techniques for your guests based on their cultivation. It will be a technique that suits them the most. Lex raised an eyebrow at John's offer. It was tempting, and was something he would not have thought of on his own. As a service it would be a great attraction, but how could he test it out? The system would only conduct a test for permanent employees, and did not have a concept for temporary ones. Just as he was considering his options, Gerard pulled up in the golf cart and Vera hopped out. She presented herself to the innkeeper with a smile and said, I'm ready. Huh? Ready for what? I don't know, she said with a shrug. But I got the feeling that I would receive some kind of reward if I came to you, so here I am. Even my mom agreed this time, see. Lex turned to see Christine, who was still sitting in the golf cart. She nodded when the innkeeper looked at her, as if to indicate her consent. Her daughter was an oracle, a very talented one at that, and most of the time that got their family in a lot of trouble. But one thing they had to acknowledge was that Vera had a keen nose for benefits, and never had they suffered a loss when she said they would make a profit. In fact, the first sentence Vera ever said as a child was, buy Bitcoin. So when it came to matters like this, Christine reluctantly let her daughter do as she pleased. Lex immediately understood what was happening. Although he did not know the specifics, he could determine from the title of Oracle that Vera could predict things, and right now she predicted she would gain something good by coming to him at this exact moment. This made John's case promising. Very well then, in that case John, you have your first opportunity. Design a technique for our guest here, and if you complete your task satisfactorily then I will hire you. John came to Vera and told her to start running her cultivation technique for him to observe, and started asking her what kind of technique she would like. Vera was very cooperative in this regard, and Lex watched silently. After a moment he turned his attention from John to the Morrisons. Since Vera said something good was coming her way, he was fairly confident that John would succeed, so he wanted to know how the conversation between the groups from those two worlds was going. They were sitting inside the restaurant in the manor, and the Morrisons had just finished talking about Earth. Alexander and Helen were missing, but Lex didn't think it was strange, they had a lot to catch up on surely. Although they were brief and did not give specific information about a lot of things, everything the family told already sounded like paradise to Chen, Blaine and Lily. Our planet's technology seems to be more advanced than yours, Lily said. Or at least, it used to be before the invasion. Although she was the youngest, Lily was actually the previous leader of her settlement. This was not because she was stronger than others, but because she was good at strategizing and managing logistics. Her many years of experience as a leader also made her better at dealing with people compared to the two brutes besides her, so they unanimously decided to let her do the talking with these otherworlders. A few hundred years ago, demons infiltrated our planets and opened up spawning portals on all the planets of our solar system and started using the resources of our planets as well as our people to cultivate stronger demons. Recently, our solar system was discovered by the Jotun Empire and they took back control of the planets, though the spawning portals still haven't been destroyed. Our entire lives, we've been surviving. Now finally, we've gone from surviving to fighting a war. This was new information Lily learnt at the reclamation camp. She had voluntarily joined the Jotun army when she thought her brother was dead. She wanted revenge as she had nothing left to live for and didn't bother to learn much about the actual war. She just wanted to fight. When she found out her brother was alive, he brought her directly here so she hadn't had time yet to learn more. As their conversation progressed, it changed from the circumstances of each other's planets to the kinds of resources they had access to. The Morrison family was very intrigued when they learned that the zombie cores they took such a liking to in the gift shop could be readily found on Vegas Minima, if one was strong enough to retrieve them of course. Eventually, Rorik said, "Lily, I wonder if you're interested in conducting a trade." Blaine and Chen shared a look and nodded, as if affirming the benefits the innkeeper spoke of were about to be revealed. "What do you have in mind? And more importantly, what can you offer?" Lily asked casually. She was not at all intimidated by her counterpart's higher cultivation. They were at the Midnight Inn, which assured their security. "We can offer you spirit stones, but I think such a trade would be very mundane. We have various industries backing us up, so we can offer you large quantities of weapons and ammunition. If you find our weapons unsuitable, we can also directly trade in precious ores and minerals. We can also provide you with protective gear and armors, in large quantities. Of course, I'm sure that the empire you belong to also has those things, or even better items, but how easy would it be for you to get access to higher level items at your cultivation? We can provide you with whatever you need directly." Rorik was speaking from the viewpoint of a very successful businessman with a massive corporate empire at his disposal, which is why he valued resources more than something simple like money, or in this case spirit stones. To Lily and the others, however, spirit stones indeed were the best option. That way they could purchase whatever they needed directly from the Jotun Empire. It was true, they could sell whatever resources they took back to the Jotun Empire, but they would have no explanation for how they came to obtain those resources, which could lead to trouble. "And what do you want in exchange? Your planet has many resources that ours lacks. Firstly, we'll take all the zombie cores you can provide, whatever level they may be at. Secondly, you are right in saying your planet seems to be more technologically advanced, which is why we're also interested in blueprints. Blueprints of any technology you can get your hands on, whether it be for militaristic use or civil, we're interested. Naturally, we're interested in any technology you can bring as well. We'll buy those too. If you have books, guides, research papers on any advanced scientific topics, we're willing to purchase those as well. Basically anything you can provide that your planet has that we lack, we'll buy. Don't be shy, use your own imagination. If you come across anything you think is useful, you can sell it to us, but the first priority is always cultivation resources. Of course, if there is something you specifically need, you can mention it and we will do our best to meet your needs. We can even provide cultivation techniques or resources from our planet if you need." The two soldiers and Lily exchanged looks. They all had a lot on their mind, and would need to discuss the details of exactly what they were going to do, but it was evident that this was an opportunity they could not miss. For now this trade route between planets could be monopolized by them, however once more people became aware of the inn they would lose their advantage. They had to make a decision fast. "I think this deal is acceptable to us, but we'll need some time to gather up supplies. How about we meet up after 1 week to conduct our first trade? For now, we'll directly take spirit stones." Rorik shook Lily's hand and confirmed the deal. Just as they were about to discuss further details, Alexander and Helen walked in holding a massive pile of cards. 10,000 Tier 1 zombie cores, 1,000 Tier 2 zombie cores, 94 Tier 3 zombie cores and 9 Tier 4 zombie cores, all here, Alexander said as he placed the cards in front of his grandparents. Those are all the cores the gift shop had available. Blaine, Chen and Lily were horrified as they knew the prices for those items, but it was Lex who was spying on this meeting who completely lost his computer and screamed internally in excitement. "What?" Fortunately, the host attire helped him control himself, otherwise the mother-daughter duo and John would have witnessed the mysterious innkeeper completely embarrass himself. The Morrison family did not have the resources of one rich family or a single country backing them up, but the entire wealth of the planet Mars. The expense of maintaining a single city for a single day was already beyond what the family had spent at the gift shop, let alone a whole planet. Alexander was a true rich third generation, and smacking people with his wealth was a maneuver he had mastered from an early age. Chapter 86 Party Planner. Externally Lex looked as calm as still water, as immovable as a mountain. Internally he was screaming like a die-hard fan of a sports team that had their first win in years. Alexander had literally bought every zombie core they had in the shop. He thought it would take months for him to sell all of them, and his income would be spread out. Who knew that happiness came like a tidal wave and swept him off his feet? Each Tier 1 zombie core was for 200 MP, Tier 2 zombie core for 500 MP, Tier 3 zombie core for 1500 MP and Tier 4 zombie core for 5000 MP. When Alexander bought them all, he spent a total of 2,686,000 MP. That's 2,680,000 midnight points. That, combined with the puny 2026 MP Lex already had, he now had a total of 2,688,026 MP. The euphoria he was feeling was similar to when he first sold his video game and suddenly became rich. Only this time, it was much greater. He was struggling to contain himself. He needed to spend some MP to relieve some of his excitement, but this stupid John person was taking too long in designing his technique. Lex cursed him 100 times in his head, then started looking through the midnight market for things to buy. Later, when he calmed down, he would spend his newly earned MP more strategically, but for now he must taste the lifestyle of a nouveau riche. The first thing he ended up doing was buy an AI dedicated to the recovery room. The name of the new staff member was Nurse Jubilation. Lex completely did not name her that because it was the first synonym that came up based on the name of another very famous and beloved nurse. If you know, you know. What else should he buy? After a moment of contemplation, he decided to upgrade the recovery room again for a whopping 20,000 MP. This was because he was sick of keeping Marlowe here while having to pay his medical fees, and wanted him to recover already. He had quite conveniently forgotten that Marlowe was the one who procured those zombie cores for him. After a couple big expenditures, Lex felt much better, but he needed to vent some more. He directly bought the permanent universal translator for 100,000 MP. But that was not enough, just a little more careless shopping before he should rein himself in. But what should he buy? He looked at Gerard, who was standing dutifully on the side, and an idea occurred to him. He used to treat his AI staff like robots, but it seemed to him that they were very lifelike and had personalities. In that case, he hadn't been really treating them well and had them working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. He should do something about that. With a cost of 1,500 MP per room, he bought 4 employee residences for his AI staff. There was no physical manifestation this time, they were wholly in a separate space, but their residences had windows that allowed them to see the inn as if from inside the manor. The AI would be able to directly teleport there when they wished. With that, Lex breathed a sigh of relief as he felt much better. After this he would continue to spend MP, but in a planned manner to systematically improve the inn. He turned his attention back to John, who still seemed to be working, but it was only fair. He couldn't expect him to rush such a thing. He started planning his expansion in his mind as he stood there silently, not paying attention at all to what was happening right in front of him. Around an hour later, John finally completed his task. He quickly explained the technique to Vera, who implemented it directly. It was not an attack or something visually impressive. Instead, Lex suddenly felt Vera's sense of existence diminish. In fact, if he didn't have the host attire to tune him into everything and everyone at the inn, he would directly ignore the girl standing right in front of her. Even her mother, who had been paying close attention to her, started looking elsewhere as if she completely forgot about her daughter at all. Only John and Lex managed to keep looking at her directly. "It's wonderful," she exclaimed as she stopped using her technique. Although she had a bombastic personality, she was not ignorant. She knew how to hide herself, and even when she secretly roamed the earth and played pranks on various cultivators, she made sure to hide her identity. She knew better than anyone else the kind of trouble her family had gotten in because of her identity, so she wanted to make sure that no one would be able to discover her secrets again. It was also due to that desire that she asked for a technique to help her side, but instead of a technique that would aid her in evasion or erasing her trace, John created a technique to hide her sense of existence. "Very well then, John, you passed the test. Come with me, I will show you where you will be working. Vera, Christine, I would like to thank you for your participation. Do stick around for a while, I'm preparing a little something that I think you would be interested in." The mother and daughter assured the innkeeper that they would not leave before they saw what the innkeeper had to show them. He led John to the street with the training room and barber shop, and directly spent 5,000 MP to create a building that had a ground plus 1 floor, similar to the barber shop. The front of the building was undecorated for now, but the interior was very straightforward. The entrance was a small waiting room with a reception and door that led to the back. The room at the back consisted of a few different chairs and sofas, including a reclining sofa he imagined psychologists had in their offices. This was for the customers to sit and relax while they communicated the technique they wanted and then waited for John to finish. There was also another door that led to a staircase that went to the first floor, which would serve as John's residence. This was not like employee residences that were in separate spaces, but was an actual room. "This will be your shop while you work here," Lex said, completely ignoring everyone's wonder at him manifesting a building with a wave of your hand. "You can live on the top floor. You can charge customers according to their cultivation levels, as I'm sure it's tougher to create a technique for higher cultivations." "This is Doe," Lex said, purchasing another AI he named Doe. "He will carry out the transactions with your customers as well as pay you your share of the fee, so you don't need to worry about any of that. Think of a name for your shop and let Doe know. I've given him authority to create your banner directly in front." With that said, the impatient Lex directly disappeared, leaving John and Doe to get acquainted with one another. Lex couldn't wait to get started on his expansion plan, but first he was going to prepare his event. He wanted to let all his guests know of its details before anyone left so he could get maximum participation. But he didn't really have a place to host events, and it didn't feel right to create an auditorium or something. The location for his event had to be a little grander than that. He went into the event manager panel and started exploring his options. Other than the venue, he also wanted to see what kind of events he could host. He tried asking Mary for advice on this, but she told him directly that he needed to complete this quest on his own. Eventually, he decided on everything and appeared behind the manor. Visualizing what he wanted, he summoned a giant building with a wave of his hand. Well, to be more accurate, he summoned a coliseum. He was renting this building from the event management panel, as buying such a massive building would cost him a lot of MP that he didn't want to spend right now. But he would not be embarrassed if he held events in such a venue, and it directly suited his taste. A few guests immediately noticed the giant addition to the inn, a building that dwarfed the manor in front of it was hard to miss. Lex made sure one more time if everything was in order, confirmed his plan of action one more time, then made an announcement directly in the mind of all of his guests. "Dear guests, please make your way to the Coliseum in 1 hour's time. The Midnight Inn is preparing a special event, and I'd like all of you to be the first to know the details." Chapter 87: A Talent Show for the Universe? Lex's announcement reached everyone who was at the inn, even the recovering Marlowe. It immediately attracted their attention, and they all started concluding their businesses. Letting them conclude or pause whatever they were doing was also primarily the reason Lex timed the invitation to an hour later. In the recovery room, 3 of the guests who had accompanied Will were being healed in the recovery pod, RP, but they would be done soon due to the upgrade the recovery room received. Even Marlowe's recovery had sped up, but the root of his issue was not an existing energy but the unstable nature of his blood. That was something he would have to solve himself, but what the RP was doing was healing his vitality. It would not take long for that to completely recover, at which point Marlowe would be able to leave. John, who was resting for the first time in years in his new office, opened his eyes and forced himself to stay awake. This mysterious inn had given him plenty of surprises, and he couldn't wait to see what else it had in store for him. Hera, who was still overwhelmed by the new world she had just encountered, was freaked out when she heard a voice in her head. That is, until she learned that everyone heard it. The Morrisons, who had concluded their initial deal with the natives of Vegas Minima and were having a discussion of their own about how to proceed, immediately stopped their discussion and moved towards the Coliseum. The mother-daughter pair had already seen it earlier and were making their way towards it when the announcement happened. Harry, who had dozed off, was woken up and tried to pick himself up but collapsed and fell back asleep. Only the galactic sovereign turtle did not care about the announcement and continued to drag a tree through the ground using vines, the previously annoyed gardener now excitedly leading him somewhere. If anyone were to see it, they would see a sight similar to one dragging a stick through the mud. Somehow, the tree did not break as it was being dragged and the ground remained undisturbed once it left. Lex, who was waiting for everyone, continued to look through the event management panel. Something interesting he learnt was that if something significant enough was happening on one of the planets connected to the inn, he could incorporate it into his own events. For example, he learned from the panel that apparently there were a few forbidden zones that no cultivators could enter on Earth, and currently a large expedition was underway to explore the one on Mount Everest. To the mortals it seemed like a few daredevils were attempting to climb the highest mountain in the world for personal satisfaction or something, but only cultivators knew that there was a legend of a holy land somewhere in those mountains that they were trying to discover. Lex could incorporate that expedition into his event and send guests to join in. He also learned that he could set certain rules or protocols that would be activated if something happened during the event. This could both be to combat emergency situations or award prizes, that was up to Lex. The only things that limited him were his imagination and his wallet. Slowly and steadily, his guests started arriving. The first to arrive were naturally Christine and Vera. They were closely followed by the Morrison family and Helen. When Vera saw Alexander, she whispered something to her mother, who looked over and then whispered something back. Brandon, seeing that they were the only ones there, went up to introduce himself to the duo to try and learn where they were from. Unbeknownst to him, the mother and daughter had an intricate and imaginative yet false backstory ready on hand, though they refused to mention which planet they were from. Shortly after, Will, his 6 followers along with Hera and Hugo entered the Colosseum. Since neither the Morrisons nor anyone from Will's party were wearing the disguise glasses, they came face to face in their original appearance. Helen quickly whispered to Alexander Will's identity on Earth, along with a few of his followers she recognized. Alexander naturally passed the information along to his father, who looked at the party with interest. Will on the other hand immediately recognized all of them, and froze in horror and fear. The entire purpose of the Rose Society was to steal control of resources from the cultivation giants of the world, and yet he was now in the presence of one of the greatest of those giants. Naturally others would not know the purpose of his society, but even still someone at his level would completely be expected to fear the Morrison family. "You seem to recognize us, friend," said Rorik with a sly smile. "Could you be a fellow guest from Earth?" "Yes, my lord," Will replied immediately, and then gave a bow. Everyone in his party bowed as well, other than Hera, who eventually copied everyone when she realized something was amiss. "Please, no need for such formalities. Here, we are all comrades from Earth. Treat me as you would anyone else," Rorik spoke casually, as if he was used to such behavior. Although his family did not claim to be royalty or demand such gestures, everyone else did not dare to treat them any less. "How dare I, my lord? How dare I? My name is William Bentham, of Bentham Corporation. My father had the privilege of working for your family once. He told me to his dying day that it was his greatest honor. This is my adopted daughter, my lord, Hera, and these are my friends." Will had not really adopted Hera, but he long told her that he treated her as his own daughter, so it was not a stretch to tell others as such. "It's a pleasure to meet you all. Come, sit, be comfortable. It's rare to meet someone from home so far away. Tell me, what brought you here?" Rorik was interested in how others from Earth arrived here, how long they had been coming, and how common it was for people from Earth to come to the inn. Will's party was much larger than their own, so there may be a chance that some of them were frequent guests of the inn. As the various groups mingled, John finally arrived as well. His unique appearance drew a lot of attention, but before anyone could approach him he chose to sit far away from the crowd. Naturally Vera and Christine introduced the man as an employee of the inn who designed techniques for guests, which attracted even more attention. Blaine, Chen and Lily arrived at and also chose to sit on their own, as they whispered amongst themselves. Even the Free AI staff made their way to the Colosseum and sat together in a group. They didn't understand the concept of chatting, at least they didn't understand it yet, so they sat in silence and looked at their boss on stage. As the hour closed and it seemed no one else would arrive, a lean, grinning man strutted in. "What a nap," he roared with satisfaction. "Innkeeper, you've really got a nice place here." Lex resisted the urge to yell at the no longer giant maniac, but suddenly he saw Marlowe's eyes light up when he sassed Brandon. "Take my punch, old man. You still haven't paid me the tuition for teaching your grandson." True to his words, Marlowe hurled towards Brandon and punched him. Brandon casually caught the punch, and though he was not pushed back by the force his eyes widened in shock as he muttered, "This strength." Yet before the two could continue their exchange, a loud, clear voice interrupted them. "If you break anything, Marlowe, you'll have to pay in zombie cores." It was the innkeeper who was looking at him with an amused smile, as if daring him to continue his antics. "Excuse me, innkeeper, I just saw an old debtor and could not control myself," said Marlowe before he burst into laughter, as if calling the Morrisons debtors was hilarious. "Well, since it looks like everyone with the intention to come is already here, why don't we begin?" Lex looked at his guests as he mentally prepared himself to introduce his event. He hated public speaking, thank the inn that the host attire hid his nervousness. "I called you all here to let you know of an event that the Midnight Inn is organizing in 2 weeks' time. The Midnight Inn is a place for guests from all over the universe to rest and vacation, to let go of their burdens and look ahead in life. We provide our guests with the best hospitality and services, but we also like to go above and beyond. Earth, Vegas Minima and Nibiru are the newest planets to be connected to the inn, and in celebration of that we are preparing a culture-sharing event so that you all may expand your horizons and get to know the customs of the universe." Chapter 88 Event Management? More like anger management. The guests promptly memorized the names of the other planets mentioned. Although no one seemed to have met any guests from Nibiru, it was irrelevant. If the innkeeper said the world was connected, then that's all that mattered. Their attention then turned towards the culture-sharing aspect of the event he talked about. Somehow, a lot of them thought of World Culture Day in schools. Were they supposed to bring food and items from their world? While everyone was staring at him and wondering what exactly the event would entail, Lex was also observing them for their reactions. When Lex was deciding on his event, the first decision he had to make was what kind of event he wanted and who his target demographic were. So far, he had mostly dealt with cultivators. In a sense, they could be called the elite members of society. Should he continue to focus on cultivators, or should he focus on mortals as well? Lex didn't need to think too much. The more people that came, the better his income would be. That meant he needed to plan an event with maximum participation from all worlds, as well as an incentive for everyone to participate. For that he needed to prepare some sort of prize, but if the prize was for an individual, no one would make an effort to bring more people from their own planets. That meant the prize had to be for all participants from a specific planet, not a specific individual. It was fortunate then that the event management panel also had a specific tab for prizes. The only catch was, the prizes were pricey. Any guest from any of the 3 planets may participate in the event. Of course, any kind of festivity is incomplete unless there is a grand prize, so whichever planet puts on the best show will. Lex's speech was interrupted by the appearance of the floating golden door right in front of him. Some of the audience recognized the golden door, some of them didn't, but Lex knew a new guest was arriving. The timing was slightly inconvenient, but another guest couldn't hurt. A zombie walked out of the door, its body emitting a putrid rotting smell. It had dried blood all over its face and its naked body was covered in mud and dirt. The zombie was at mid-foundation level, and as soon as it appeared, Lex summoned the self-defense butter knife in his hand, but waited for it to attack before he made a move. The guests froze as no one was expecting such a scene. Marlowe and the guests from Vegas recognized the latest guest and readied themselves for any potential trouble, but the rest looked on with interest. The zombie took a few moments to look around its new surroundings, but when it saw Lex it let out an aggressive roar and prepared to attack. Yet before it had taken so much as a single step, Lex threw the butter knife straight through its forehead, killing it. His actions were swift and decisive, which led to an anticlimactic end to the sudden intrusion. "It's a tragedy when certain guests just can't abide by the rules of the inn," Lex said as he appeared indifferent. He mentally instructed Gerard to dispose of the zombie's body but recover its core. "Please excuse me for exposing you to such vulgarity," he said, looking at his awaiting guests. Only Hera looked bothered by what just happened, and Will was consoling her, which was fortunate. "Will the event include sharing some of my culture with the zombie?" Marlowe asked, smirking. "I don't mind paying them a visit again. It was quite enjoyable." "No," Lex said, chuckling, "of course the barbarian wannabe would only think of fighting. Various planets have different circumstances and different combat standards. Having a combat portion in the event would make it unfair to certain planets." Lex was interrupted once again by another zombie, but this time the status of the zombie read mid-golden core. For a moment Lex froze in fear, but quickly recovered and his thoughts started racing. "The zombie is too close to me. If it attacks, I'll be the first victim. I can teleport away, but that'll expose my weakness in front of everyone. What can I do? The butter knife can only deal with Foundation realm enemies. No wait, I have MP, I can pay for an upgrade. How do I upgrade?" Just as these various thoughts were going through his head and he was about to upgrade the butter knife through the midnight market, the zombie identified Lex as its prey. This zombie's eyes were more animated than the previous ones, and Lex could see excitement in them. Yet before the zombie could make any actual moves, vines grew out of the ground and wrapped themselves around it. The zombie tried to resist, but new vines kept growing and wrapping it similar to the bindings around a mummy. Once the zombie was completely wrapped, it fell over to the ground. One could still clearly see the zombie struggling within its wrappings, but it bore no results. The grass around where the zombie fell grew and lifted it up, and started moving the zombie away from the Colosseum as if the zombie were a celebrity crowdsurfing and the grass were all of its fans carrying it. "I told the turtle you brought it some fertilizer," Mary whispered in his ear, as if explaining what happened, but didn't appear in front of him. She didn't want to distract Lex. He was supposed to be presenting in front of his guests and had already been disturbed enough. Once the zombie left the stadium, Lex turned his attention to the golden door, which stayed in the air for a few more moments before disappearing, as if detecting Lex's displeasure. When the vines surrounded the zombie and took care of it, the first thing Lex felt in his heart was relief, instant, immense relief. Yet right after that, he started feeling angry. This was supposed to be his inn, yet he had no control over it because his authority for everything was too low. He was in the middle of presenting, but he kept getting interrupted with intruders and embarrassed in front of his guests. As Lex's internal monologue continued, he did not notice that he had clenched his fists tightly or that even his host attire could not stop him from frowning. He was not controlling the weather directly, but as if affected by his mood, the clear sky started filling with clouds and his anger started exerting pressure on everyone, similar to what one felt when they reached the bottom of the deep end of a pool. "Lex, you're getting angry again. Control your emotions," Mary said, appearing in front of him this time. Lex immediately snapped out of his thoughts and realized what he was doing. With a single thought he returned the sky to what it was and eliminated the pressure, as if it was all a dream. Yet none of the guests thought it was a dream, they had all clearly felt what had just happened. The soldiers and Lily seemed the least affected by what they just witnessed. In their minds the innkeeper was already an extremely dangerous figure. You know what, Marlowe, I changed my mind. Lex looked towards his guests. 2 weeks from now the event will be divided into a combat portion and a cultural portion. The combat portion will be limited to the foundation and golden core level for fairness, but everyone can participate in the cultural one. There will be no age or race restrictions. Specific details about both events and how to participate will be released in 10 days, so don't forget to check back in. And remember, the winning planet will get an attractive prize, so do your best. With that Lex disappeared, leaving his guests to absorb everything he had just said and all that had happened. The staff were the first to leave, followed closely by John. Looks like our host has a bit of a temper, Marlowe said with a grin, then looked towards Alexander. Little brat, you shouldn't bring your family with you when you're out on a date. Despite having gotten over her feelings, Helen blushed but made no comment. Old geezer, it seems to me like you're getting weaker. Now you even need to come to the inn to recover after getting beaten up. Oh, am I getting weaker? Maybe you should ask your grandfather. Marlowe waited for Brandon to comment on his increased strength, but it was Rorik who said, can we focus on the matter at hand? Does anyone know what that thing was that kept interrupting the innkeeper? And what do we think about this cultural and combat event? That was a zombie, informed Marlowe. And what do you mean, what do we think about it? Didn't you hear the man say there is a prize? We're of course going to go after it. At this point Marlowe's jolly demeanor changed, and he looked very seriously at Rorik, but as someone who's seen the zombie battlefield let me tell you this. If we even want a chance at winning, we're going to need the combined strength of the entire solar system. Or, at least, the strength of all 5 ruling families. Chapter 89. Insert title here. When Lex disappeared, he teleported directly to his room. He told Mary to let him know if something required his attention, for example if all the rooms were booked and he needed to create more rooms, but otherwise he should not be disturbed. He realized that he was having severe mood swings, and needed to calm down. He sat down cross-legged on his bed and started trying to meditate. It was not a skill he had mastered yet, and it usually took him some time before he could enter a state of meditation. Yet whenever he was able to meditate it helped his mental state tremendously. Back at the Colosseum the guests had split up. Will and his party retreated to Hugo's room, although not before Rorik took down their names and contact information. The mother and daughter left the inn entirely despite Vera's best efforts to stay a little longer. Blaine, Chen and Lily also left the inn as they had a lot of things they needed to take care of. The Morrisons, along with Marlowe, left to the room Alexander had rented earlier on. What are we going to do? Asked one of the members of the Rose Society. This one trip, which was originally just supposed to be about catching up with Will, had turned out to be beyond anything they had ever expected. All the members of the society were very old according to mortal standards, but as cultivators they were only middle-aged at best. It was not unusual for a Foundation realm expert to live up to 200 years old, especially when even mortals occasionally lived past 100 these days. So with their long life ahead, they did not want to court death by messing with the Morrison family, even if it was for the purpose of the Rose Society. Their passion to challenge the world had been worn out with age and experience. We can completely forget about the battle portion of the event, said Will. But we can make preparations for the cultural aspect of it. For now we don't know what the details will be, so just organize your forces. Pick out people with various talents and prepare a cultural exhibition. But do not underestimate the impact of this event, or the Midnight Inn. If we play our cards right, the Midnight Inn can become a great source for all the resources we need. We can trade directly with the guests here, or the inn itself, and distribute the resources on Earth. We just need to be careful about how we do it. We can form a new company, added Hera. She had little to no knowledge about cultivation, but she had been a business major and had recently entered the workforce, which made her realize that she had a skill for these kinds of things. The company will be the front, but we can distribute the work amongst ourselves. We'll pool our resources and develop distribution channels all over the world. We would need a list of resources available at the inn, and what kinds of resources we can trade with guests. It will take time in the beginning, but if we can establish a stable source for multiple unique resources, we can use them to establish our brand recognition. The meeting continued for a few hours while they all discussed their ideas on how to expand the influence of the Rose Society. Only Hugo stood in the corner in silence, watching the cabal. He did not care about these things, but if the influence of the Rose Society grew, his chances for learning who harmed his family would increase. His fist tightened and his nails dug into his hand, but he did not feel that pain. His entire focus was on revenge. Why I know these things, or how I was involved, I cannot tell you, Marlowe said up front. Even though he had rejected the job offer from the inn, he had a feeling that he should keep those things a secret. The innkeeper already told him that he would not be persecuted for his choice, but it would not be good to antagonize the man. What I can tell you is that I have witnessed a battlefield on another planet against these zombies, and they number in the millions. They have thousands of golden core zombies and hundreds of nascent ones as well. In an upfront fight, Earth would completely be decimated with no chance at survival. Which is why I don't think the fighting will be directly putting us in the battlefield, nor can I imagine a tournament-style one-on-one with the zombies. Whatever it may be, I think collecting the zombie cores will be an important aspect of the event. Once we return, I'll head directly to Earth and call for a meeting, said Brandon as he played with Audrey's hair. We will need to organize most of our forces, but we also can't leave Earth and Mars completely unprotected. We'll have to figure out those details. But even so, based on what Marlowe said and what we learnt from those kids on Vegas Minima, the chances of us winning the combat portion of the event are slim. Our focus should be on the culture aspect of it. Earth has been relatively peaceful for the past few decades and has developed well in that regard. I think that's where our advantage lies. Are you going to bring the other 4 families here? Asked Alexander. Right now, as far as he knew, his family was the only one who knew about the inn and had an advantage over the rest. Even if they lost the events, he thought it was worth it to maintain the advantage of keeping the inn a secret so that they could develop their own family. He expected that the others would eventually also learn about the inn, since even Marlowe had come here somehow, but until then he wanted to maintain whatever advantage he could keep. Yes, there's no point in keeping it a secret, said Rorik. I've told you this before, but all 5 of the families do not have a competitive relationship. We all have the same goal of maintaining the peace of Earth, and working together on this will be beneficial for all of us. Do not be short-sighted. Alexander sighed. The relationship between the 5 families that secretly controlled the Earth was unusually cooperative. Not that Alexander had a problem with that, but in such a cutthroat environment it simply didn't make sense. But he was not privy to the details of their relationship, in fact even his father was not in the know. Only his grandparents knew the exact details of why the families cooperated. The discussion continued for a few more hours before the Morrisons left, leaving Helen and Marlowe behind. Helen could not leave yet as she would return to Egypt and would be exposed, so until Alexander returned to Earth and secured her exit she would have to stay. Marlowe stayed behind because while his old injuries had been healed, his problem with his blood made him vulnerable and he did not want to leave until that was taken care of. He winked at the young girl once with a grin, then exited the room. He found Gerard and asked the old man, I need to cultivate a bit. What would be the best place for that? Should I rent a room? No, we have a better place especially suited for cultivation. Please follow me, he said cheerily and hopped into the golf cart and drove to the meditation room. As soon as the former behemoth entered the meditation room he felt its effects and smiled in satisfaction. Wasting no time he sat in a meditation pose and started focusing on tempering his blood. He had a strong feeling that when he succeeded, the results would be staggering. After a few hours of hubbub, the inn returned to its usual calm. John took this time to explore the ground of the inn, with Doe following closely behind. Doe was equipped with all the knowledge the regular staff of the inn automatically received and so served as an adequate tour guide for John. Most of the things John saw did not surprise him, as it was no big deal for someone of the innkeeper's status to be able to provide such services. The array in the forest drew a bit of his curiosity, as although he could recognize the array he could not break through it. The thing that attracted him the most, however, was the mystery trial. Even though John's cultivation was sealed, his intuition was sharp and well honed, and he immediately felt attracted to the trial. Once Doe told him the first attempt was free, he did not hesitate and walked in. As soon as he stepped through the ancient door, he felt his surroundings change. He was not standing or walking, but crouching in the shadow behind a rock. The peculiar thing was that the rock was at the far end of a white, rectangular room that was extremely well lit. There was no furniture in the room, no windows, nothing to distract the eye at all except the rock at one end, and a man standing at the other end looking directly at the rock. The only other shadow in the room, besides the one John was taking a refuge in, was at the feet of the man who was looking at the rock. John smiled as he learnt the condition to pass the trial. He had to kill the man while remaining undetected. It would have been difficult for anyone else, but as his cultivation had somehow been restored in this trial, he found it to be extremely simple. System, activate perimeter scan and check for traps, John said mentally. Instruction received. Activating scan, replied a robotic voice in his head. Chapter 90 Starting Expansion. Scan complete, no anomaly detected, replied the system. John let out a satisfied smile when he heard that familiar, monotone voice. He asked the system to scan instead of using his spiritual senses because the system was a lot more covert. Scan the target and formulate a detailed plan of action for eliminating the target. Scanning the target. Formulating plan of action based on gathered data. Presenting the data now. John looked over the plan and played it out in his head multiple times. Once he was sure he was ready, he took a step back and entered a void. The void existed in parallel to the existing universe and he could traverse it easily using the system's abilities, entering and exiting wherever he wished. He exited in the air above and behind the target, but when he exited he was surprised to see the man looking directly at him. Before John could respond he felt a sharp, painful rip in his neck. The next thing he knew, he was back behind the boulder, as if nothing had happened. In his mind, a countdown started. He had 59 minutes left to successfully kill the target without being detected. Lex found it hard to start meditating, but once he did he stayed in the state for several hours. When he was done, contrary to what one might expect, he felt mentally exhausted. Stabilizing his overactive spirit drained him, but he felt satisfied as he could feel himself making progress. It was slow, but it existed. He made a resolution to meditate for a few hours every day. But for now, he needed sleep. Sweeping the inn with his mind once he made sure there was nothing that needed his attention, then went to sleep. He woke up the next day feeling refreshed and despite wanting to stay in bed for a bit longer, he jumped out and headed towards the shower while he ordered Gerard to deliver a hearty breakfast to his room. Once he showered and dressed himself in his host attire, he sat down to a breakfast of eggs, bacon, hash browns, sausages, buttered bread, tea, cereal, Pop-Tarts, cold pizza. He had to tell Gerard specifically he wanted the pizza to be cold, as if just taken out of the fridge, croissants, bagels, donuts, cottage cheese, crackers, hummus, grapes and several other dishes that would make one wonder if the innkeeper had gone insane. No, the innkeeper had not gone insane. It was just that his appetite had exploded with his increased cultivation, and while previously he could eat endlessly without gaining weight, now he felt like if he did not eat enough he would faint. This was actually an extreme case of what most cultivators went through before they started drawing spiritual energy into their body. The energy requirement of their body would increase, and since his only source of energy was food he would need to drastically increase his intake. Later, once his body developed the capability for absorbing spiritual energy, he would be able to reduce his dependence on eating ridiculous amounts of food. Not that he was complaining, it was a different kind of pleasure being able to eat so much. While he ate, he opened up the system and took a look at what he could do. Currently he had 2,551,526 MP and there were many things he could do. He directly set aside 1 million MP for the event. He was actually expecting to spend around 500,000 MP, but he thought he would leave himself a buffer. While looking at the system he was surprised to see that the rooms booked by Bautet and Phallic were both free now. It had already been a month. Lex took a moment to reminisce about all the things that had happened the last month, then got to work. Lex was expecting a lot more guests at his inn as a result of the upcoming event, so he needed to increase his capacity. Currently he had 7 regular rooms, so he purchased 13 more for an expense of 6,500 MP. He also hired 3 more AI whose sole job would be to take care of the guests in the manor. They would clean, take care of room service, act as a concierge or whatever else would be required of them within the manor. He naturally also purchased residences for them, for a combined expense of 10,500 MP. He made Velma in charge of the new staff. Originally he was going to give Gerard the responsibility, but if he was restricted to the manor then the old man would be deprived of the joy of driving around the gold cart, so decided to give the old man a different job. That job, as one can expect, was head chauffeur. He bought 3 more golf carts, and hired 3 new AI staff to be chauffeurs. Of course, it goes without saying, he bought them employee residences as well. His total expense for this was 11,100 MP, each golf cart was 200 MP. Before he turned his attention away from the manor and towards the rest of the inn, he also hired a final AI to be the chef at the restaurant and named him Ramsey. With that done, and no new required alterations to the manor that Lex could think of, he turned his attention to the rest of the inn. The only 2 new rooms he could build at the moment were the patisserie and the guild room. For the patisserie Lex had something special in mind, so he didn't build it for now. Lex bought the guild room for the cheap price of 1,000 MP and placed it beside the barber shop, and then paused because of how insignificant the amount seemed right now yet how much it had intimidated him earlier. Yet he didn't dwell on it for long as the guild room required more of his attention. It required another full-time employee, so Lex hired yet another AI, and at this point it should be automatically understood that along with each AI came its own room. The guild room, contrary to its name, did not allow guests to set up guilds. Instead, it allowed guests to more easily interact with other guests. They could submit tasks or requests in the guild room along with a reward for completion of the task, which other guests could accept. Both, The guests who submitted and accepted the task could do so with their identity hidden or shown, whichever they preferred. On the surface this looked like a simple place where one could hire mercenaries or adventurers to perform tasks, but it could also serve as an excellent trading platform. For example, if one guest had a surplus of a certain resource, such as zombie cores, they could put them in as a reward for a task that is asking someone to submit a corresponding number of spirit stones. Anyone who was in need of the cores could pay or submit the spirit stones and receive the cores. This eliminated the need for guests who wanted to trade with one another to coordinate timings and arrive at the inn at the same time to conduct the trade. The guests also did not need to be at the inn to receive payments, as they would directly be sent to the relevant guest wherever they were in the universe. Lex really wanted to open up armories so he could sell weapons, which he could in theory, but then he would need to supply the weapons as the system had not unlocked the building yet. He also wanted to build a library to store cultivation techniques, but did not have enough of those yet either. He had an idea to open up a movie theater, but it would be suspicious if he only had Earth's media on it, so he had to delay that plan till he had movies from other places. Then, while he was browsing the midnight market, he saw a tab he had never seen before called Employee Benefits. Intrigued, he opened it and was immediately filled with excitement. Apparently the tab was unlocked when he hired Harry, but since he had given all of his AI staff employee residences, they also became eligible to receive these benefits. So why was Lex excited about the prospect of his employee getting benefits? It was because the first option under benefits was cultivation. All of his AI staff were absolutely loyal to Lex, as assured by the system, so he had no qualms about funding their cultivation. He opened the cultivation tab, which presented him with a list of all his employees and which cultivation techniques were suitable for them. Without hesitation, Lex spent 20,000 MP and bought all the AI staff the most suitable cultivation techniques and told them all to start practicing in their free time. He also told them to write them down and submit a copy of each to him. After all, he had to start his collection for his library from somewhere. Chapter 91 Leaders from the Universe. So far, on his little expansion during breakfast, Lex had already spent 56,100 MP. It truly spoke volumes about how criminally understaffed he had been. He should give Velma and Gerard some kind of reward. He'd put it on his to-do list, because for now he wasn't done. There was one more thing that he had been putting off, one more thing he had been dreading to even look at because of his severe lack of MP. Yet now, he could not wait to explore. He opened up the gift shop tab to look at what else he could purchase, and indeed, a few new items were waiting for him. He smiled as he read through the new items' descriptions. Bath towel. Don't you hate it when you get something disgusting on yourself? Cleaning up is such a hassle. The bath towel rids the user of negative status that are affecting the user via the skin, i.e. poison, paralysis, paste, petrification, tracking powder, bad makeup, etc. Can affect foundation realm and below. Travel size face washing kit. Sometimes, when you don't feel like yourself, it's good to be someone else. Allows user to change their appearance as they wish for 24 hours. Please note, only physical appearance changes, not height, body structure, fingerprints, spiritual signature, gait, etc. Selfie stick. Whether you're traveling the countryside, shopping in a mall, fighting a legion of enemies, there is no wrong time to take a selfie. Whoever you hit with the stick will temporarily be petrified, as if posing for a selfie. Duration of petrification is variable, but chi training cultivators can be petrified for 10 seconds. Lex smiled, satisfied with the few new additions, and directly purchased them and put them in the shop. The bath towel was sold for 300 MP, while the other two were sold for 200 MP, all of them giving a profit of 100 MP. Lex concluded this just as he finished his breakfast. Lex grinned in satisfaction as he stood up. He felt slightly bloated, but the feeling would pass in a bit. Now, he had to focus on where else he could make improvements. He had upgraded the recovery room twice and had reached his limit, so he supposed he could upgrade the other places as well. Lex frowned. Currently he didn't really need to upgrade them, and though he had a lot of MP, he should not treat it as infinite. He would let the other place be for now, but there was one thing that did require an upgrade. Lex disappeared and reappeared in his greenhouse. Currently neither the gardener nor the turtle were present, though Lex did not suspect them of slacking. Even if they were resting, just looking at the condition of the greenhouse let him know the amount of work they had been doing. The plants had all been rearranged. At first they were divided by their use and type, while now they seemed to be mixed. Lex was sure that this arrangement served some kind of purpose, but even beyond that they formed a strange symmetry that felt pleasant to look at. What pleased him the most was that his vegetables looked almost ready. Admittedly, he did not know what vegetables ready to be picked looked like, but just the fact that from seeds they had grown into sizable plants was enough to tell him what he needed to know. Without any hesitation, Lex upgraded the greenhouse twice, spending 15,000 MP. The upgrade seemed very lackluster in Lex's opinion as there was no visible change, but he didn't doubt the system so he disappeared. What he did not know was that the gardener instantly became aware of the upgrade as well as the new functions of the greenhouse. The gardener almost collapsed when he found out, as he knew that the turtle would want to rearrange the garden, once again. With that done, Lex turned his attention towards more selfish tasks. He had given all of his employees residences, but had ignored his own. As the owner of the inn, he too could have a residence in a separate space, though his would be more expensive. Yet since he was going to be spending all his time here now, he didn't see why he shouldn't reward himself. He spent a hefty 20,000 MP on establishing his own residence. It was nothing too fancy, though there were options for those as well, and only built himself a single-story apartment. The apartment had a living room that was simultaneously also the dining room, along with a small kitchen, 2 bedrooms, a study, a restroom, a meditation room and a training room. Yes, Lex liked to live simply and humbly. The meditation room and training room had the same effects as the ones in the inn, and despite the fact that he still had to pay to use them, they were very convenient. The apartment was, of course, fully furnished. Satisfied, Lex went to his study room and began working towards his upcoming event. Although the event was 13 days away, and the announcement of the details would be in 9 days, Lex had a lot of preparations to do. He opened up the event management panel and looked at a very important tab that read, Paid Promotion. Yes, it was exactly what one would expect. Lex could pay MP to promote his event in all 3 worlds. Since he was planning on having a large event, how could he rely on word of mouth to spread the news? The scope of the event would be too limited if only a few dozen, or even a few hundred people came. He was running the Midnight Inn, not a small community comic-con, he needed attendance. But letting guests come early would not be good, and he needed to establish a premise for his publicity and an incentive for participation. He noted down a few ideas, played them out in his head, then crossed out a few and then worked on them again. When he was finally satisfied with what he wanted, he smiled, and paid the 150,000 MP promotion fee. That was 50,000 MP per planet, but considering how he was doing his promotion it felt cheap. Somewhere on Nibiru, in a large palace underwater, a young mermaid was playing with a similarly young sea serpent. Large, intricate runes formed chandeliers above the playing child, and changed colors according to her mood. The mermaid, who was only a few weeks old, was easily entertained. Watching over her in the distance was a much larger and more ferocious-looking sea serpent. If someone from Earth saw this blue-colored monstrosity, they would think of a Chinese dragon, yet despite its power and prestige, the serpent did not have the audacity to add dragon to its title. They will grow up as friends, the serpent murmured. It will be a happy childhood, replied a beast that looked like a massive lobster. It would be best if the child's identity is forever forgotten. She does not need to bear such burdens. She should be free to choose the path her heart desires. The serpent was about to reply, but suddenly it felt a massive surge in spiritual energy. It felt the surge pass through the underwater palace until it reached him, and then froze around the serpent. It felt like it was locked under the gaze of an unknown entity, and though the serpent felt no hostility, the strength of that gaze caused the serpent to tense up. Haval Elyun, a booming voice spoke in its mind, ruler of the Jade Sea, king of serpents, your strength is recognized and your reign acknowledged. You are invited in 9 days' time to the Midnight Inn to discuss participation of your kingdom in the Midnight Games. Strength and glory to those who win, a chance to witness history for those who lose. Which of those will be yours? The spiritual energy disappeared along with the unknown gaze, but in their place a single silver key was left. Somehow, Haval knew that the key would turn golden in 9 days and take him away, if he had the guts to follow it. What Haval did not know, however, was that it was not the only one on Nibiru to hear the voice. All the kings, queens and rulers of all the nations felt the spiritual surge and heard a corresponding message, the universal equivalent of spam messaging. On Vegas Minima, General Ragnar sat in front of a hologram that depicted the entire planet. Every inch of land, every battlefield, every citizen were shown on that hologram, because it was being streamed directly to him from the several Juggernaut-class vessels in space. He watched, not with his eyes, but with his spiritual sense, every single detail and remembered all of them. Every moment he was receiving more information than even the best and most powerful computers on Earth could handle. But the frown on his face was not because he was getting too much information, but because he was not getting what he was searching for. Eventually he sighed and began preparing his report that they were still not able to locate the demon spawning portals, but stopped when the devices around him reported an unusual surge in spiritual energy. Ragnar Isulf, a voice boomed in his head, son of the Empire, Hell's Butcher, your ruthlessness is known and your leadership is admired. Chapter 92 Not Welcome Without the Wife. When General Ragnar heard the complete message and received the silver key, he did not act alarmed nor was he surprised by the sudden event. He knew enough about high-leveled cultivators to know what they were capable of. He simply accepted the key after scanning it for potential traps or poisons, and then sent an emergency communication to the command carrier explaining what he had encountered. The command carrier was like a forward operating base, but for space instead. It was a massive spaceship that harbored the main combat and logistics ships for any space-based deployment. The command carrier assigned to this reclamation deployment of the Vegas system was actually hidden somewhere outside the solar system. Not only was it equipped with weapons that could completely decimate planets and shields so powerful that it could protect the ship from a direct collision with a sun, it could communicate directly back to the Jotun Empire's central command planet from anywhere in the known universe. Shortly after his communication he received some information as well as new orders. Apparently, he was not the only one who received the message. Although he was assigned the entire planet, there were several colonels under him who controlled several bases around it. All colonels with enough power, not cultivation power, power to command, also received the message. It was also suspected that all the commanding officers of the Demon's legions also received the communication. He was ordered to command the delegation that would head to the Midnight Inn. His purpose was to gather intel on the nature of the organization known as Midnight Inn and establish a preliminary relationship with it representing the Jotun Empire. He also had the discretion to make decisions based on the evolving situation once he went to the Midnight Inn, keeping the interests of the Empire in mind. Ragnar did not hesitate, and immediately started preparation. His first order of business, establish a new chain of command on the planet while he was gone in case this was a trap. In the meantime, he did not stop the search for the spawn portal either. Somewhere on the other side of the planet, an especially malevolent-looking zombie stared at the floating silver key in front of it. It took a moment before it made some sort of decision, and changed its appearance, retracting its several extra limbs, claws, fangs, wings and tail. In the end, the zombie looked like a frail, malnourished college student with no features to distinguish it from a zombie. It grabbed the key before retreating through a portal. On Earth things had finally calmed down slightly after the tense few days following the Alexander assassination attempt. Yet suddenly yesterday everything changed. Every ICPA on the planet started enforcing a very strict curfew and mortal armies of several nations were deployed to their borders. Most people did not understand what was happening and conspiracy theories were abundant. Only a select few knew that the current situation was a result of some actions taken by the Morrison family. Even fewer knew what those actions were. For separate families received an emergency summon from Brandon Morrison, who also claimed that he was returning to Earth to hold the meeting in person. This had various consequences, as the four heads of those families were immediately informed. All four of them grimaced at the news, as such a meeting would only be called if it concerned gravely important matters. While they were preparing themselves for the worst, the situation escalated further. An open broadcast sent out on a secret channel known only to the top echelon of Earth sent out the message that if Brandon Morrison dared to land on Earth without his wife present, his landing shuttle would be nuked. This was the exact message that caused every ICPA, every nation and every top cultivator on Earth to panic and prepare for the worst. This was because the origin of the message was not hidden. In fact, not only was it not hidden, the person who sent out the message even identified themselves during the broadcast. It was sent by the oldest and most mysterious figure in the cultivation world. This mysterious personage was known the world over only by the title of the Queen, and no one knew her actual name. How strong was she? How old was she? What was her origin? What were her intentions? No one knew the answer to any of these questions. The only thing people knew was that the Queen lived in a certain palace in London and that her image was often printed on various currencies across the globe. Although Brandon assured everyone that he was coming with his wife, everyone was still tense. Very few actually knew the significance of him coming with his wife as opposed to without, and this caused everyone to speculate madly. While all this was happening, one of the primary people responsible for the confusion on Earth, the Queen, was sitting casually in her garden sipping a pie, a colada, while her pet corgis ran around beside her. One would expect that a cultivator of such prestige would have high-level beasts as pets, but no, these were just regular dogs. It was raining in London, but naturally none of the rain fell in the Queen's garden. How would the rain dare to fall there without acquiescence from the Ancient One? She did not at all look concerned regarding the upcoming meeting or its contents, let alone the status of the world. No, her attention was towards a TV screen on which a cricket match was being played. The World Cup was going to be held the next year, how could she not follow the progress of her favorite team? It was while she was focused on the TV that she felt a surge in spirit energy, and a booming voice said, "Your Majesty the Queen, your kingdom is prosperous and your wisdom is legend. You are invited in 9 days' time to the Midnight Inn. She heard the whole message, received the key and then turned her attention back to the match. The timing of the message was too coincidental. It seemed she had deduced the purpose of her upcoming meeting of the 5 families. Lex chuckled to himself as he imagined the reactions of the various leaders on the 3 planets. It was extremely annoying receiving spam emails and messages all the time on Earth, but he had to say sending his own messages felt rather interesting. Yet he could not linger in his musings. Once the promotion was taken care of, he had a few other key things to take care of. He had titled this event the Midnight Games, since he could not think of a better title, but he still had not exactly figured out the content of the games or how the event would proceed. He needed to do a lot of research for that before he made a decision. This was also the reason why he had a 10-day buffer before announcing the details of the event. It would give him time to decide the exact details. But that was not all. How could he not take advantage of such an opportunity to make some more MP? He had to figure out the best way to monetize this event. Fortunately, the event panel gave him a few options there as well. What were these options? Why, limited edition merchandise based on the event, of course. How could you doubt the business sense of the young man who spent so much time in capitalist America? It was the most amazing feature of America, after all. The only people who complained about it were the ones who could not learn to take advantage of it. T-shirts, caps, drinks, flyers, posters, food, drinks, toys and more were all options available to him. Even better was the fact that all of these items could be designed and altered at a moment's notice, so if any one person performed well and gained a lot of fans during the events, Lex could immediately create merchandise around that person. Would this affect the prestige of the inn? Lex didn't think so, and even if it did, he could just hire a PR consultant. Why sweat the small stuff when he could pay someone to do that for him? Another, and much more important aspect for Lex to look at was security. He was expecting thousands of participants, and tens of thousands of viewers. Most of those would be cultivators? There was bound to be troublemakers, and even if he upgraded his butter knife, there was no way he could handle all of it. Fortunately, the event manager panel provided a solution to this. Unfortunately, the solution was expensive. Yet how much exactly was Lex willing to spend? That was the conundrum he was facing at the moment. It was better to be safe than sorry, but he hadn't even paid for the event yet. He could not blow his entire budget just on security. Or, at the very least, he would have to increase his budget and somehow get even more MP. If only the system accepted mortgages. Chapter 93 Leo. For Lex, security was very important, but it was also very expensive. After staring at his options for a long while, he decided to deal with it at the end. How much MP he had left once he'd planned for the event would determine how much he would spend. Mary, is there something the system can do to help me speed up my cultivation? Or, at least, my employees' cultivation? There are many things that can speed up your cultivation. Unfortunately, the system cannot provide them to you. Maybe if you get lucky one day you'll receive something in a quest reward that'll help you. But it's unlikely, as the focus of the system is to develop the inn, not your cultivation. You have to rely on yourself for that. Lex sighed in defeat. Since he had to cheat anyway, why didn't it let him cheat all the way? He turned his attention back to the event panel and looked at temporary accommodation. He didn't want to build too many permanent rooms right now, as his inn would get cramped, and as someone who spent several years in New York, he'd had enough of that. Another solid 100,000 MP was tucked towards 1,000 temporary rooms that guests could rent during the event. The cultural event would take place in the Colosseum, and would precede the combat portion. There were multiple phases for both, and the way Lex had planned it out was that the first phase was similar to a festival with several booths or stalls held concurrently. Guests could view them from their rooms or go and view them in person. Lex was initially planning on having some kind of voting system that would promote the best stalls, or perhaps choose them himself, but he found the event planner had options for that as well. Whichever exhibit garnered the best responses could automatically be detected and promoted. Of course, doing it this way turned things into some sort of performance rather than just showing cultural exhibits or historical pieces. For example, if someone wanted to show historically relevant paintings that affected their culture, they could garner interest once by people, but in the later phases showing the same stuff would not elicit the same reaction. Lex had thought of a solution for that as well. Should an exhibit want to do that, during the first phase they could show the historical painting or artifact, and during the later phases they could make new paintings or whatever else to show how the previous ones influenced modern creation. And if some people didn't like that idea? Well, tough luck. From the moment the concept of a prize for the winning planet was introduced, the event changed from a pure cultural sharing experience to some sort of competition. Such was the nature of the world. Or the universe. Whatever. Lex spent the next few hours fine-tuning the details for the cultural portion of the event and the proceedings. Eventually when he was done he prepared to go back and continue meditating, but scanned the inn once first. Marlowe was still in the meditation room and Helen was sitting in a lawn chair surrounded by peacocks once again. Yet this time Lex noticed a difference in Helen. While all previous times he had seen her she seemed preoccupied or lost in thought, this time, she just seemed bored. She was stuck at the inn, and with her thoughts much clearer now she felt she had nothing to do. She spent some time cultivating, but similar to extraneous exercise, it had to be done in moderation or she would hurt herself. This left her with nothing to do. Just as Lex was considering if he should do something about that, he received a new notification. Emergency quest. Your guest has stayed at the inn for several days and has become disillusioned by your paltry attempts to seem grand. Provide a distraction or entertainment for your guest. Quest time limit, 3 hours. Quest failure punishment, -1000 MP. Quest revat, elegant top hat. The punishment was almost negligible to Lex now, but he still didn't want to fail. But how should he distract her? How should he entertain her? He quickly looked through the midnight market but found no new buildings or options for entertainment. Any ideas? He asked Mary. She shook her head and said, I can't help you with quests, Lex. You're the host, not me. These are things you need to figure out on your own. Lex frowned as he thought of what he could do. Previously he wanted to bring in movies and shows from Earth, but then it would be suspicious if he only had content from Earth and not other planets. Not to mention, it would seem strange if he as the innkeeper fretted over each and every minor detail, such as providing entertainment for a single guest, so he should not be directly involved as well. He needed to maintain his image as a mysterious and powerful being. It would be so much more convenient he could create a clone to do stuff for. Lex froze as he felt an idea coming to him. He could feel it, it was right there, on the tip of his thoughts, just out of reach. It was like a word he knew but forgot when someone asked him for it. Just out of reach. Quickly he went through his thoughts again to see what triggered it. It would be convenient if he could have a clone or someone who could pretend to be an employee to do the things he could not as the innkeeper. Eureka! He had an epiphany. He quickly checked the midnight market to see if he could do what he wanted. It didn't have what he wanted exactly, but he checked a few different things and tested a certain item he had to see if they worked together, and, unexpectedly, things worked out. Lex grinned and bought a building and put it right next to John's shop that had a banner reading Battle Axe. It was a strange name choice, but Lex didn't question it. Lex smiled as he quickly designed the new building, and designed its interior. He had to admit, as he thought of the possibilities of what he could do he was having a little fun. Helen sat lazily in her lawn chair as she thought of random things. She was bored, but she didn't mind too much. It was rare for her to have so much free time in her life. Even idle boredom was a novel experience. Yet when she heard some noise in the distance and immediately recognized it to be the sound of a new building being raised at the inn. She'd seen enough of them to appear to become familiar with it by now. A new building also meant a new service, which intrigued her. She got off her chair and asked Gerard to bring a golf cart to take her to the commotion. She didn't mind the walk, but she liked indulging the old man. She'd spent some time talking with Gerard, as she had with all the other staff at the inn. Most of them were very simple and pure, and had straightforward personalities. The only thing they wanted was to serve the guests and make sure they were happy, and had very few interests beyond that. Velma, she had noticed, absolutely loved gossip. But because of her professionalism, she never spied on guests. Yet whenever Helen chatted with her, the young girl listened with the eager interest of a child with wanderlust. Gerard was easier to please, as all she had to do was let him drive her places. She didn't envy them as she was quite content with her own life, but she found it remarkable that they all enjoyed such simple pleasures. When she approached the part of the inn she now called Main Street, she saw the new building and when she read the name her jaw dropped. No way. It can't be, she thought. This was the Midnight Inn, how could such a place find its way here? Yet she was even more curious to find out. Without any hesitation Helen entered the building that wore a banner reading Gamer's Den. The first thing she saw was a relatively young man standing in the shop wearing jeans and a t-shirt. She noticed that he was also wearing the Clark Kent glasses, but so was she, so she was not one to judge. When the young man saw her he revealed an excited grin and said, "Welcome. Wow, my first guest already. That was faster than I was expecting. You can call me Leo and this is my gaming center. If you give me just a moment, I'm still downloading all the games onto the computers. As soon as they're done I'll show you this game I think you'll absolutely love. It's called League of Lexes, or LOL for short. LOL is super popular, I think you'll learn it pretty quickly." Leo paused for a second when he got a notification for quest completion, but then turned his attention back to Helen and started asking her if she'd played any games before. Oh yes, this was going to be fun. Chapter 94 Playing Games to Cultivate. Leo was, naturally, Lex. He simply took off his host attire and put on one of the glasses to stay anonymous. He still did not use his actual name though, to avoid even the chance of any suspicion. He was excited because he had finally figured out a way to interact with his guests without having to worry about how he appears. He could ask the stupidest questions. After all, he was just the owner of a gaming shop. It wasn't even magical, like the barber shop or the battle axe. It was straight-up video games on computers. It was unfortunate that he couldn't connect the shop to the internet back on Earth, but he could make do. Other than video games, the computers would have an extensive library of movies and videos to watch, but it would take time to transfer all the data. How did Lex manage to get all these games and videos if the shop couldn't connect to the internet, you ask? As it turns out, through the fancy monocle. When Lex had connected it to the internet to build up its own database, it had absorbed everything. Lex could selectively upload the data from the fancy monocle onto his computers. Who knew other than its original purpose the monocle could act as a USB? It just went to show that he should not limit his understanding of things according to the system's descriptions. "I've never played video games before, is it too complicated?" asked Helen. She was up to try it. When else would she get the chance to game so casually? "No, not at all. It's very simple. I'll teach you, it'll be very easy. And if you don't like this game, just wait a bit. New games are being added to the system as we speak, it'll just take some time." The gaming shop was both on the ground and first floor. On the ground floor, guests would be able to rent a chair and desk where they would get access to a computer along with all the essentials such as mouse, keyboard, controllers, if you prefer, headset and whatever else you wanted. On the first floor, guests could rent private rooms so that they could game in peace without the distraction of being in public. He kept both options available because sometimes the atmosphere of the shop contributed to the gaming experience, but sometimes during important matches you could not deal with any distractions. This way both options would be fulfilled. Also, for anyone who wanted to play VR games they would have to rent the rooms. Lex took Helen to a seat and started the game for her. He took the desk beside her and booted the game up for himself as well. "I'll help you through a few games while you get the hang of it," he said, as he set up the LAN party. From the counter a small figure watched the two. The AI for the store, who was known only as Z, was the first AI who already had a name upon being summoned. He was also different from the other AI staff in another important manner. The rest were all adults, even Velma was in her teens. Z on the other hand looked like he was 10 years old. When he was sure that the two were preoccupied with whatever they were doing, Z opened the admin computer and started watching an anime called Initial C. It was a racing anime with the main character being an old man who looked somewhat similar to Gerard. Summoning one of the snacks sold at the gaming shop and unceremoniously charging it on Lex's tab, Z started watching anime. Neither Lex nor Helen noticed this as Lex was walking her through the tutorial and controls. League of Lexes, or LOL, was played using several different heroes, all of whom had different abilities. It was a game where one had to compete for limited resources and equipment with the enemy, all the while attacking the enemy base to keep pressure on them and prevent them from getting those resources as well. "These heroes are based on real-life cultivators on Earth," Leo said, once he was done explaining the various hero abilities. "Really?" Helen asked, surprised. "I dunno, probably," Leo replied. By now he had already selected his own hero and had completely forgotten about Helen. Helen was annoyed at Leo, but also curious about him. He was older than her by a lot, at least by her standards it was a lot, but he was the one acting like an excitable child. He started the game and they were playing against the computer, and contrary to her surprise he did not abandon her to go play, but walked her through the map and introduced her to the many mechanics of the game. He helped her fight enemies, collect resources, get familiar with her abilities, learn about cooldowns and more. When enemy heroes attacked them he helped hold them off so she could practice combat. The speed at which she was picking up the controls was astonishing, and within 10 minutes she did not need Leo's help at all. At this point he left her alone, so she could try and get used to playing alone while he went to a different part of the map. Surprisingly, they had good synergy and quickly defeated the computer. Satisfied with Helen's skill level, Leo said that this time he'd play against her so that there was more of a challenge. She was very receptive to the idea and Leo started a new game. For the first few minutes Leo almost felt bad for her, as not only was he very experienced in the game, his skill had only increased since he started cultivating. But quickly he noticed that Helen was dominating the game. She was killing off the heroes on his team and stealing all the resources she would need to build her armies. Leo went to block her, but found that he was always one step behind her. Something was definitely wrong. It was then it occurred to him, she was also a cultivator. Not only was she a cultivator, her realm was above his, so her response would naturally be even better. The game shop owner took this personally and started playing without holding anything back, as this was no longer a matter of entertaining a guest but a matter of honor. The match finally ended with Leo taking a reluctant lead, but Helen asked to play again. The second match was a draw, the third in Helen's favor and the fourth another draw. Without realizing it, the two had been playing for over 2 hours. When Leo noticed the time, he knew he had to stop as he had other things to take care of, so he left Helen to her own devices. He let her know that other games would also have been downloaded by now if she wanted to explore, and that since she was his first guest he wouldn't charge her this time around so she could play as long as she wanted. The young girl was a little disappointed to see Leo go, as she wanted to defeat him thoroughly, but consoled herself by saying she would do so next time. Leo asked Z to take care of Helen if she needed anything, and left the shop. The shop owner disappeared, and reappeared in his apartment. He took off his glasses and changed back into Lex. The innkeeper was a little pale as he had exhausted a lot of mental energy focusing on the game. Helen still had not mastered the full mechanics of the game, but her reaction time made it difficult to compete with her. He would get his revenge next time and show her what real skill was. He took a nice, long shower to relax before he went to the meditation room. Lex had decided to meditate every day to increase his cultivation. Just as he was getting into position and about to begin, Mary appeared in front of him looking hesitant and confused. "What is it?" Lex asked, ready to receive some bad news. "I can't be sure, but I think." There was a lot of hesitation as she took a pause, before finally deciding to state the insane fact she had discovered. "It seems like playing video games has the same effect on you as meditation." "What?" Lex asked excitedly as he jumped up. This was too good to be true, right? Meditation was difficult and sometimes boring, while gaming was the exact opposite. How could they be interchangeable? "Well, I'm not sure yet and there's no conclusive proof. You should keep meditating for now, but this is definitely something we can research. If it's true, who knows, your gaming shop could actually qualify to become a real midnight in service." Lex grinned. One research paper he wrote in college were the mental benefits of gaming. As a true gamer, one who regularly showered and took care of his hygiene, Lex was strictly against gamer stereotypes. How could he miss the opportunity to benefit the gaming community? Chapter 95: The Five Families. As much as Lex would have liked to go back and play some games, he could not take any risks. He sat down to meditate and after a few hours of varied success, he went to sleep. It was a rare peaceful day, but Lex knew the coming days would be super busy so he needed to rest while he had the chance. Brandon's shuttle landed on a private airfield, yet the landing itself was not a private affair. Various interested parties and powers were watching from a distance. Audrey was the first to exit the shuttle, much to the relief of the viewers. She was followed closely by Brandon, and Alexander, who was completely wrapped in bandages. Although he was completely fine, they wanted to give the impression that he had been seriously affected by the poison they proclaimed had affected him. Yet the onlookers didn't have much time to analyze his condition as the family quickly got into a car and left. What they did not know was that the Alexander who followed Brandon was a decoy, and the real Alexander left the area wearing a synthetic face mask that gave him a different appearance. His grandfather was on the way to the meeting while Alexander would go and retrieve Helen before meeting up with them. Unbeknownst to the world, 4 of the 5 nascent realm cultivators of Earth had gathered in Geneva and were awaiting Brandon's arrival. Of the 4, only the Queen was a public figure. The others stayed out of the limelight and could not be bothered to put up a public front. A tall yet skinny old man named Sam sat lazily on a lazy-boy sofa. In his younger days he was very active in North America, and was the true origin of the term Uncle Sam that represented the government's authority in America. Yet lately he had retreated from the front stage to live a secular life. A rather ordinary-looking Chinese man sat opposite to Sam, dressed very modestly. He also looked rather aged, though no one knew how old he really was. He went by the English name of Richard and no one here knew his actual name. Behind him stood a young girl dressed in traditional attire. She looked around the room with a lot of curiosity, but did not speak or interact with anyone. While in her normal day-to-day life she was treated with a lot of importance, in this room she was the most insignificant. In a stark contrast to all the aged yet physically fit-looking cultivators present, a fat, middle-aged man was sitting by himself munching on chili chips. Although he was not Asian, he was making use of chopsticks to pick each individual chip and eat it to avoid getting the chili dust on his fingers. Wearing an extremely loose t-shirt and gray pajamas, the man looked as if he was lounging. His attention was on a phone screen in front of him that was playing a movie, and he had headphones in. They continued this way for a short while until Brandon finally arrived, Audrey following closely behind. All eyes turned to him when he entered, and then turned to Audrey. Everyone, even the fat man, breathed a secret sigh of relief when they saw her. The couple smiled at the response, they were quite used to it. Compared to everyone else, Brandon looked much younger as he had broken into the nascent realm at a very young age. He was also actually much younger than everyone else as well, so he maintained his youthful vigor in comparison to the rest. That, combined with the natural charm emitted by a high-leveled cultivator paired with Brandon's usual cavalier attitude, gave everyone here a headache. More than one young lady from their respective families had fallen prey to the old man's flirtations, though thankfully he never did anything beyond that. In the entire world, very literally on all of Earth, Audrey was the only person who could control Brandon. Not that bringing her along made things much better, the two were known for their endless shenanigans. There were countless international incidents that the two were suspected of being behind. The only time they had been caught was during an incident when Brandon was going around using the alias Innkeeper. They were also the reason that the Mona Lisa was stored behind a bulletproof glass case that actually had spiritual enhancements as well. No one could prove it, but it was also suspected that they were the source of the mystery at the Bermuda Triangle. All in all, the two were a troublesome duo, but they were still much better together than alone. Even Audrey, who seemed so demure most of the time, was not any less dangerous than Brandon. She had once changed the regime in an actual country because she felt the leader was not very handsome. The replacement, who she did consider good-looking, then had a bounty placed on his head by Brandon. "Welcome back to Earth, Brandon. I hope you had a pleasant trip," said Richard politely. "It was long but not bad, Rich. How have you been? How's the family?" "I've been well. My family is doing well. This is my great-granddaughter, Celine. She is quite talented in cultivation. I'm hoping she will succeed me one day." He pointed to the young girl behind him, who bowed to the youngest nascent cultivator, but had a look of hesitation in her eyes. Clearly she had been briefed to keep a distance from him. "If you want her to succeed you need to feed her more. Look at how skinny the poor girl is, she's practically anorexic," said the fat middle-aged man. Everyone directly ignored whatever he had to say. Unlike everyone else here, the fat man was not originally a cultivator. He was a mortal who got lost in a forest once and ate some random plant that elevated his cultivation all the way to nascent overnight. Since then it had become this guy's hobby to eat anything and everything edible all the time. All he did was eat. He owned several restaurants around the world and had even developed his own cultivation technique that revolved around eating that he passed down in his family. "Can we focus on the matter at hand? I have things I'd rather be doing," said the Queen. "Yes, it's better not to delay," agreed Sam, fixing his posture from his previous slouch. "I believe everyone here heard the invitation to the Midnight Games. I'm assuming that's why you're here as well, Brandon." "Midnight Games," he said, questioningly. Like all the other two planets, the announcement was only made to leaders who were on the planet, so Brandon, who was traveling through space at the time, did not hear it. "I'm not sure how you guys know about it, but I suspect we are talking about the same thing. Richard, since you've already selected an heir, you will also be particularly interested in this. I believe I've discovered a place where anyone can naturally break through to the nascent." All 5 other people in the room suddenly lost their slack demeanor and looked at Brandon with eager eyes. This was not a joking matter. "Let me start from the beginning," Brandon said, and started telling the group everything that happened, starting with Alexander's assassination attempt. Once they all heard the story, they similarly told him how they all heard the invitation by name to an event called the Midnight Games. It did not even need to be debated if the games had anything to do with the inn, it was already obvious. No, the people in that room were pondering over another question. "Celine, go out for a while. The following discussion is not for you," said Richard, dismissing his granddaughter. This was the point where normally Brandon would have dismissed Audrey as well, but no one suffered the illusion that the man kept any secrets from his wife. "The question now is, do we report to them?" asked the fat man hesitantly. "Naturally, we don't have any other choice," stated Sam bluntly. "If it is later discovered that we have been keeping secrets, we will immediately be replaced." The room fell into silence. The Midnight Inn represented a great opportunity for them as well as for all of Earth, but whether or not they could avail such an opportunity was not up to them. After a few more minutes, the Queen took out a laptop from a bag she was carrying and opened it. Instead of booting up, the laptop projected the image of a woman up into the air. She seemed surprised by the call of the 5. "What's the matter? Has something happened? Is it another beast tide? It seems too soon for that." The 5 exchanged looks, before turning towards Brandon. Since he was the only one to have been to the inn, he should be the one to make the report. "Earth has come into contact with other star-level civilizations," Brandon started off. "That's impossible. Up to 1 million light-years of space surrounding the solar system are under our surveillance. No one can enter undetected." "It's not so simple. Let me explain." Brandon started giving his report to the floating projection, giving clear details of everything he had seen and experienced. If anyone else were to see him they would be shocked. He was one of the leaders of one of the solar system. He commanded the largest cultivator army, and had endless resources at his disposal. Who could make him report to them? Yet here he was, along with all the other powerful cultivators of Earth, giving a simple report, hoping for a favorable response. At this moment, he was no longer a commander of legions, he was a simple subordinate. He was even well behaved in front of her. Though, whether that was because of the woman's status or his wife standing behind him, no one could say. Chapter 96 Interlude. When Brandon finished giving his explanation, the woman stared in silence as she contemplated his words. It did not take long, however, before she reached a decision. Increase surveillance on the guests I've sent to Earth. Make sure they're comfortable, but don't limit them. Try to keep them from going to the inn, but if you can't then just report to me. Regarding the inn and the midnight games, you may do as you see fit so long as it does not compromise the safety of Earth. Before the gathering in a week, I'll send someone over to join you and observe. With those instructions given, the woman's hologram disappeared and the people in the room breathed a sigh of relief. With that out of the way, they now needed to decide their own actions. Brandon, you're the one who's been there. How do you suggest we prepare for the upcoming games? I've already put a considerable amount of thought into this. I'll let you know how I plan on deploying my family's resources. What you decide to do is up to you. The meeting continued for the better part of the day, and by the time they dispersed it was well into the night. Silently, all 5 families started preparing for the upcoming midnight games, but what they did not know was that shortly after their own meeting finished another one was held in a bunker deep underneath the Sahara Desert. Our opportunity has arrived, said one of the people sitting in the bunker. It's a lot earlier than expected, but we'll never get another chance like this again. Ready our forces, and start moving our assets into place. A revolution is on the horizon. When Lex woke up the next morning, not only was he feeling extremely refreshed, he also felt extremely motivated. Today he needed to do some research on how events were held and what format to keep the combat portion of the games in. The original reason he wanted to avoid having a combat portion was because he did not want the death of multiple people on his conscience. When he kept getting interrupted and lost his temper, he spontaneously decided to fight against the zombies, but even so he didn't want to host an upfront war scenario as that would result in many deaths and he would feel responsible since the only reason they died was because they participated in his event. But what exactly was the format going to be? He did not know yet, and that's where the research aspect came in. After having a hearty breakfast and scanning the inn once to make sure everything was in order, he promptly returned to Earth. After turning his phone back on and responding to his family's text, he found his way to the nearest public library. He hopped onto a computer and started looking up every famous competition in history. He checked out everything from the Olympics and Commonwealth Games to World Championships and municipal tournaments. He looked at high school and college events to small cultural ceremonies and competitions in various third world countries. While he was researching, he got a notification for quest completion and checked to find out that he had completed his quest to grow spiritual vegetables. He received 3 seeds for rare plants and directly transferred them to the gardener and had him plant them, along with instructions to plant a lot more vegetables as he was expecting a lot of guests in a couple of weeks. Lex returned to his research, treating the interaction as an ordinary interlude, but what he did not realize was how important those seeds would be to him. When they were titled as rare, they were not rare on a continental or planetary basis, but instead they were rare in the whole universe. He would later learn that, in fact, he would not even have been able to successfully plant them without the aid of the galactic sovereign turtle. He stayed there until one of the librarians came to tell him that the library is getting ready to close. Lex exited, but before he returned to the inn he sent Larry a text asking if he was okay. Lex was expecting to have messages from him waiting when he turned on his phone, but there was nothing. The silence was unusual and Lex was slightly concerned, especially considering the circumstances when he left. When Lex did not receive a reply after a short while, he decided to return to the inn and check again tomorrow morning. If he still didn't hear anything, he would consider what to do. Maybe he would kick Marlowe out of the inn to go clean up his mess. When he returned to the inn, he was surprised to find that at some point Helen had left. It was worth noticing that Hugo's booked room had also been freed up recently, so after a LNN time the inn was once again without any guests. If it weren't for Harry who was practicing his sorcery in his shop and John who was actually playing video games in the gamer's den. Intrigued, Lex checked up on him to find him playing the AAA game called Hitmail, about a man who was raised his entire life as an assassin carrying out multiple missions. Lex himself had never played the game, but it was popular for how broken the game was. Yet as long as people found it entertaining, who cared? Lex was tempted to don the Leo persona and go interact a little with John, but he had work to do. Lex returned to the study in his own residence and started working on the event. He started determining the distinctions between each stage, how guests would come, where they would stay between stages. He had to make a distinction between participants and viewers. He also needed to prepare for the announcement meeting he had called. For that meeting the invitations had gone out to all the various leaders on the 3 planets. Such a meeting could not be taken lightly, and he needed to have all his preparations done by then. After working for a few hours, Lex retreated to the meditation room before eventually heading to bed. The next few days went by in a similar, peaceful manner. Without any unexpected surprises or interruptions, Lex slowly felt his state of mind improving. His fast progress was surprising not only to himself but to Mary as well, though she did not tell him that. At the current pace, he would undergo the procedure right before the midnight games started. Finally, 3 days before the meeting took place a new guest entered the inn via the pro bono program, alerting Lex. If that's all there was to it, Lex may not have been concerned at all since he had a well-trained staff and system now. What really threw him for a loop was the notification from the system that he did not have adequate facilities to cater to the guest. Confused, Lex scanned the inn to investigate the situation and was alarmed by what he discovered. In the small lake he had built next to the recovery room a baby whale was swimming in circles, full of confusion and alarm. The lake was too small for the baby whale, and it kept getting trapped as soon as it swam even slightly close to the edge. "Mary, what can I do?" Lex asked as he looked at the calf. "Would I have to expand the lake?" Expanding the lake and establishing a different biome for other types of guests is definitely a good idea, but that way you'll have to duplicate all the buildings in each biome. There's an easier solution. You can buy the multi-environmental subsistence facility. Buying one for all environment types may be out of your budget, but you can definitely buy focused ones for water-based guests. Without hesitation Lex went to the midnight market, searched for the multi-environmental subsistence facility and bought it for 300,000 MP. It must be noted, this facility was focused and would only allow marine-based guests to survive in the open. The change was immediate. A thin layer of water surrounded the baby whale and allowed it to swim directly out of the lake. The water followed the whale wherever it went, giving rise to the unique sight of a baby whale flying around the inn surrounded by a kiddie pool worth of water. The whale was freed from its immediate conundrum of being constricted to a tiny body of water, but it was not relieved yet. It was apparent to Lex from the way the whale flew around frantically that it was still confused or scared, maybe even both. "I guess it's time for me to go to work," Lex said to Mary with a smile, and disappeared. Lex reappeared right in the whale path, as if he was standing on thin air. "Please guest, be at ease. You are safe here, no one will harm you." Lex's voice carried with it a calming effect, soothing the distressed whale. The whale did not question why it could understand Lex, but once it understood that it was safe it stopped swimming haphazardly. Then it started crying. Chapter 97 Good or Evil? Lex was dumbfounded by the crying whale. He looked towards Mary for some advice, but the hologram looked confused and defeated as well. Lex tried multiple times to console or question the baby whale, but it would only cry without saying anything. He checked its status to see if he could discover some details that would help him. Name. Age, less than 1 year. Sex, male. Cultivation details, mortal. Species, whale. Midnight and prestige level, 1. Bloodline, ordinary. Remarks, the whale suffers from a broken heart. Lex learned that the whale was less than a year old and had no cultivation at all, but that did not help him much. For once, the remarks were not snarky and only said that the whale had a broken heart, but Lex did not know what to do about that. But Lex did not need to do anything as very soon the galactic sovereign turtle appeared on the scene, softly saying, "Oh dear," repeatedly. It grew out a vine from the ground that softly wrapped itself around the whale and brought it down. The turtle made a hand out of grass and used it to softly caress the crying whale as he whispered things to it. The whale seemed immediately fond of the turtle, and continued to whimper as it listened to the turtle. Eventually, the turtle led the whale towards the forest, pulling its giant body with the vine. Lex watched the two leave in silence, relieved that the situation was handled yet strangely concerned about the whale as well. He decided to check up on the whale in a little while to see what had happened. For now, he turned his attention to the inn. The midnight games were about to begin and while he had his preparations done, he was concerned about his 2 non-AI employees. Harry did not seem at all disturbed by the lack of guests lately and could always be found practicing his sorcery in his barber shop. Lex had handed him a new cultivator's guide that he downloaded directly from the Bluebird online platform. The young barber had already registered himself as a cultivator back on Earth and had attained a legal status. In fact, he had also joined a rather loose organization of beauticians who happened to be cultivators. They were all low level, with the highest in the organization being peak chi training realm, but the focus of all the cultivators in that group was fashion and style. Or at least that's what Lex understood they did. He did not look too deeply into it. Lex had also used his identity as Leo to get some information out of the young barber about sorcery. Unlike cultivators who grew stronger using spirit energy, sorcerers channeled their abilities using the strength of their soul, as well as external artifacts. Cultivators grew stronger inherently, which then raised the level of their souls. Sorcerers directly strengthened their souls, which then reflected in the growth of their strength. Harry did not explain in too much detail, but Lex understood that a simplified explanation for one of the main ways to grow stronger in sorcery was to constantly practice and use your abilities. A result of his constant practice was that he would not completely exhaust himself after giving a single haircut using his abilities, like before, although his stamina had not increased by much. Something interesting that Lex also learned was that Harry also received mini-quests of his own from the system that he fulfilled back on Earth, which helped him raise his strength. It seemed like the system was grooming his employees well. Lex turned his attention to John, and found him once again in the gamer's Denver. This time he was not playing games, but watching anime with Z. Lex did not know how to feel about John. He would never practice or meditate or do anything productive. He would always only be found in the gamer's Denver. Using his Leo identity, Lex had asked him some details as well. It seemed like the only thing John was interested in was going into the mystery trial, yet since he had had no customers, John had no MP to go to the trial. This intrigued Lex. Apparently John had gone into the mystery trial, but did not gain anything. He did not learn any new skills or discover any flaws in his existing ones. He was only beaten up, and that too quite terribly. That was unusual as the trial was supposed to be very helpful, but if it was John was not willing to mention it. Lex decided that once he was done with the midnight games he would try the trials as well. For now he didn't want to distract himself. Speaking of distraction, a couple days ago Lex had wasted the whole day because he was slightly careless. His latest quest reward was an item called Elegant Top Hat. As is usual, Lex had forgotten about it when he completed the quest and only looked at it much later. It had a very useful ability. While wearing it, it could enhance the capability of his brain by up to 100 times, depending on how one used it. Lex put it on to try it out. He only elevated his ability by 5, and at first he felt no difference. He thought he would be smarter or more enlightened or something. It turned out the wording was not clear about what the ability of the hat was. It sped up his thoughts, so that anything that was happening in front of him seemed to be happening in slow motion. The event wasn't actually slowed down, just his perception of it had increased so much that it appeared to be happening incredibly slowly. Lex played around with the hat a lot, but a side effect of using it was that it would drain you mentally. Lex quickly discovered that after using it for only a short amount of time, he was so mentally drained that he slept for 18 hours afterwards. Suffice to say he got no actual work done that day. Lex continued to check up on all aspects of the inn. Marlowe was still in the meditation room, with no indication of when he would come out. His AI staff had mostly entered the body-tempering realm, which Lex was happy about. Everything was as it should be. Finally, Lex went to the turtle to inquire about the whale. What he did not expect at all was that when he arrived at the forest, the whale's status had changed from a pro bono guest to the turtle's pet. How had the turtle taken one of his guests as a pet? Not only had the system recognized the whale as a pet, its name had been changed to Little Blue. Lex cursed 100 times in his head. Why didn't the system care when he was naming the turtle Little Black? Whose system was this anyway? What's going on? He finally managed to ask, looking grim. All jokes aside, he couldn't allow his guests to be scammed. He needed to learn the details, or otherwise wouldn't his reputation be ruined in the universe. Little Blue's family was hunted down and killed by fishermen, answered the gardener, who looked at the whale with pity. The turtle and the whale were practically stuck together right now, and although the whale did not look sad at the moment, the turtle was not taking any risks. Lex silently listened to the gardener explain what it had learnt. The whale was not from any other planet, it was from Earth. It was completely ordinary and had no cultivation whatsoever, and neither did any of the whales it grew up with. His family had been hunted by fishermen and Little Blue had either escaped or was let go for being too young. That point was a little unclear. Lex grimaced as he heard the story, then let out a sorrowful sigh. The whale's story was tragic, but he understood the perpetrators probably weren't evil. Although whaling had been reduced in recent years, it was not completely banned and some countries still partook in it. Suddenly Lex had a bitter taste in his mouth. He was reminded of Nibiru, where humans were the ones who were at the bottom of the food chain. In either case, could the perpetrators be called evil? It was just how the natural food chain set them up. For the first time in his life, he understood the saying he commonly read in novels. Weakness is the original sin. No one was inherently evil, usually, but it often happened that one person's interests harmed another. Lex's mood started fluctuating, so he quickly retreated back to his residence and started meditating. He was probably going to see a lot more situations like this across the universe. He needed to get used to it, or figure out how he was going to deal with it. Chapter 98 spoiler title at the end of chapter. It took some time for Lex to stabilize his emotions this time around. His mind kept slowly inching him towards feeling guilt towards Little Blue for what had happened to it. He had to constantly stop himself from having wandering thoughts and focus back on meditating. Eventually, when he finally stabilized his mood and meditated. When he was done, he discovered that while it was harder for him to meditate this time around, the benefits had also been greater. With his mood calmed down and his thoughts clear, he firmly came to the conclusion that he cannot take ownership of guilt on behalf of others, even if they were from the same race as him. He only had to focus on his own actions and act according to his own conscience. Even if others were saints he would get no credit, and if others were devils he would get no blame. With that out of the way, Lex turned his attention back towards his event. He was feeling a little excited now, and it was only a couple days away from the arrival of all the leaders. He looked at his MP and had around 2,100,000. Originally he kept a budget of only 1 million MP for the event, but with the scope of what he was planning it was not enough. He had been waiting till the last moment to spend his MP as he did not want to rent stuff for too long, as each day would cost him more. But now it was time. First, he had to get the big stuff out of the way. He had already decided on the awards for both portions of the event, so he spent 250,000 MP on each. The amount might seem like a lot, but considering that the prize was for a whole planet, it was actually very cheap. In fact, it was one of the cheapest options available in the event management panel under rewards for an entire planet. Before the prize was actually awarded he would be able to upgrade them if he wanted, but Lex would only do that if he earned an enormous amount during the event itself. Right now it was difficult to judge the earning potential, so he would have to wait and see. His next expense would be the extra staff for the event. This cost him only 50,000 MP. In this package he would not get any actual new staff, but each individual guest would get a private hologram assistant when they arrived at the inn during this period. The assistant would be able to answer all their questions regarding the inn or the event, and if they needed any actual service they would be able to use the power of the system to automatically provide them. His next two expenses were the ones that strained his budget the most, but were ones he absolutely could not do without. The first one was event security. He was expecting a lot of guests to attend the event, not only because he would tell the various leaders who were going to attend to bring as many guests as they wanted, but he was going to distribute silver keys throughout the 3 worlds that would automatically activate when the event started. Due to the massive number of guests, he was absolutely sure that someone would disturb the peace. Parents fought each other during their kids' talent shows, let alone crowds during such a large event that would be representing worlds. So Lex put a heavy hand on his heart and spent 450,000 MP on security. This would get him 200 peak golden core guards, 50 peak nascent realm guards, and 10 guards at the peak of the realm above nascent. Lex found it slightly humorous that he could hire guards at that cultivation level, but his authority with the inn was not enough to view the name or learn details about that realm. Still, he felt that these guards should be adequate to maintain the crowds. He wasn't sure what the highest cultivators on the other planets were, but he was hoping none of them were on the same level as Batet, as he was sure she was much more powerful than even his strongest guards. Though, based on public knowledge of cultivators on Earth, his guards should be more than enough to handle any trouble. All the guards that appeared seemed to be wearing suits, fashioned after the style of his own host attire. Lex absolutely did not mind having tough but well-dressed guards keeping the discipline. In total, the 2 awards, the extra staff and the event security cost him exactly 1,000,000 MP. He had already spent his entire original budget. Keep in mind, so far he had not purchased any event-related items to be sold, any decorations, any consolatory prizes, not to mention keep an emergency fund for unforeseen expenses. Still, he had 1,195,526 MP left. That should be more than enough to cover any unexpected expenses. Or so he originally thought. Although Mary did not give him any advice whatsoever, he would often tell her his plans while he was drafting them. The holographic assistant, unbeknownst to herself, had a terrible poker face and Lex would often find it easy to read her thoughts. So when he saw her hesitant and worried look after he finished his plans, he realized he was missing something. After a little trial and error, he came to a single conclusion: he was missing a private bodyguard. A private bodyguard was different from the event security. Their attention would be divided amongst the entire crowd all throughout the event. His private bodyguard would focus solely on defending himself. Still, considering the great deal he got for 450,000 MP, it should not be a problem to get a good deal on a private bodyguard. He mentioned the amount he was planning on spending to Mary, but discovered that while she still did not say anything, her appearance did not get better. Lex frowned, thought about it a bit, and decided his own personal safety was worth splurging on. After all, if he were dead, what was the point of saving MP? So he resolutely decided to spend 500,000 MP on a personal bodyguard. Just as he was about to make the expense, he noticed that Mary still looked worried. That stopped him in his tracks. This was no longer a simple expense. The fact that such a large amount still did not assure her meant that he was clearly underestimating the strength of his incoming guests. But it did not make sense. All 3 planets were 1 star, and should have had the same level of cultivators. He was not expecting cultivators on the level of Batet because she clearly stated that she had been put on Earth as punishment by her father, meaning someone of her level should not have been on such a planet. She was an anomaly, not a norm. In that case 500,000 MP on a single bodyguard should have been overkill. But the fact that it wasn't meant that he was missing something. Lex thought about it a little, and went back to everything he knew about each planet. It only took a little contemplation before he remembered something incredibly obvious that he had overlooked. When Blaine, Chen and Lily had come last time he had spied on their conversations just a bit. He had learned that the Jotun Empire was reclaiming their planets. Lex did not know the Jotun Empire, but clearly an empire that could colonize other planets from completely different galaxies could not have been simple. Since he invited the leaders on Vegas Minima, they would have learned about the inn. It was completely possible for them to send some very powerful cultivators to investigate. Realizing his mistake, Lex no longer hesitated. It hurt his heart to spend so much, but he ultimately decided to spend 1 million MP on a bodyguard. That left him with only 195,526 MP, but Lex could make it work. Somewhere on the opposite end of the universe, far beyond the reach of simple entities such as the Jotun Empire or demons or Batet and Phallic, a cultivator was practicing a new attack skill. He needed to practice only once to learn an attacking skill to its highest level, but for all other types of skills he would require extra effort. Yet he did not mind. He firmly believed that offense was the strongest offense, and had learnt various attacks that ranged from physical to spiritual to even soul attacks. He could attack using elements, he could attack using dreams, beliefs, thoughts, and most recently he had learned to attack even with laws. He was blessed when it came to his combat capabilities. To be more exact, he had Mo's blessing, a cultivation technique that could destroy the universe itself when he reached the highest level. Yet what he was practicing right now was not an attack but a stealth technique, so it would require some time. Still, he did not mind as he had all the time in the universe. Host, you have a new limited edition quest. You can choose to accept or reject it. You have 5 minutes to decide, he heard a feminine voice in his head. A limited edition quest? I haven't encountered quests like that before, what's the difference? Checking host authority insufficient to learn details, using special bloodline clearance, host authority partially accepted. A limited time quest is one that comes with certain conditions. You have the option of accepting or rejecting without any consequence, however if you accept the quest and fail you will be punished heavily. Yet if you succeed in the quest you will be rewarded correspondingly. What are the details of this quest? You have to act as someone's bodyguard for a week. The special condition for this quest is that after you finish, all your memories of the duration of the quest will be erased by the system to protect the identity of the person you were protecting. The man smiled in amusement. Interesting. Can I decide the reward for the quest? I want to change the quest reward to simply raise my authority as much as possible. The level of the system is too low, it cannot benefit me at my strength right now whatsoever. Negative, the reward is fixed, using special bloodline clearance, reward changed. If you accept the quest your authority will be raised by 10 levels, if you fail you will have 0.5 bad hair days while you are in public. Do you accept? The man's smile grew. The system was too amusing. If he didn't know better, he would say the system was in love with him. I accept. Chapter title, Mo's Blessing. Chapter 99 The Bodyguard. Lex had to wait a few minutes before his bodyguard finally showed up. Emerging from a bright light, Lex saw a handsome man walk out. He had long, silky blonde hair and sun-kissed skin. At first glance Lex assumed the bodyguard was human, but after looking at him for a while something started to feel off. While he had the appearance of a human, something about him told Lex that the being in front of him absolutely wasn't human. What Lex did not know was that he was being protected by the natural aura emitted by the bodyguard. If he could have felt the aura, he would have been even more assured of his guess. Welcome, you can call me the Innkeeper, Lex finally said. While Lex had been observing the bodyguard had similarly been observing the Innkeeper. He was unable to determine the Innkeeper's cultivation, and was surprised that the Innkeeper remained unaffected by his natural aura. This had nothing to do with cultivation, his natural aura suppressed others on a biological level so even those with a higher cultivation than himself would be affected. The only exception the bodyguard had seen was when he suppressed his own aura consciously to prevent it from affecting others. Lex took this time while they observed one another to check the bodyguard's status and was surprised by what he saw. Name, and %error %end. Age, and %error %end. Sex, and %error %end. Cultivation details, and %error %end. Species, and %error %end. Midnight and prestige level, 1. His status was almost identical to John's, which was unusual. Lex had to figure out what exactly it was that caused these errors in his status. It didn't feel good being left out of the loop. Finally the bodyguard nodded in acknowledgement, but did not say anything. After that the bodyguard disappeared, as if he had teleported somewhere, but Lex knew he was still close by. The system had informed him of the bodyguard's duties. The bodyguard would protect him anytime anyone took action against Lex with malicious or hostile intent, but was under no obligation to listen to Lex's orders. To assure Lex, the system also told him that the bodyguard was incredibly powerful and had a strong incentive to protect Lex, otherwise he would suffer a strong punishment for failure. If only Lex knew what that punishment was, he would not have been so assured. With that out of the way, Lex returned to his preparations. A little something that irked him was that Marlowe was still in the meditation room. Despite his inner voice telling him to save his MP at the moment, Lex spent 10,000 MP to upgrade the meditation room so that whatever Marlowe was trying to achieve would be done sooner. Something worth nothing was that he eventually managed to contact Larry on Earth, but Larry was behaving strangely. Lex assumed it might have something to do with Marlowe's disappearance, so he really wanted the old geezer to return. Lex started changing the appearance of the inn a bit, putting up lights and adding sky lanterns in the sky so that the inn would look more festive. He even spent 10 MP to buy a suit that could be worn by Little Blue. Despite his large size, the baby whale looked adorable in the new costume. It was during this time that Lex started receiving some guests. Naturally it wasn't the guests invited for the event, but those that already had golden keys. It was Chen and Lily, who arrived with several bags in tow. Literally they were covered from head to toe with bags, and as soon as they arrived at the inn they collapsed, dropping the bags on the ground. Various cores, papers and other gadgets fell out of their bags, but the duo quickly started cleaning up. "Please, allow me," Lex said as he summoned Gerard and his subordinates, who loaded all the stuff onto their golf carts. "That's quite a lot of luggage. Are you planning on having a longer trip?" "Thank you for your assistance," said Lily, handing her bags to the staff. "These are not actually our luggage but some things for your guests from Earth that we met last time, Rorik and his party. We agreed to trade a few things. In that case, you should have them bring your stuff to the guild room. You can explore it yourself as well in the meantime, I think it will serve you well." "Thank you, we will," she said as she sat in the golf cart and allowed Gerard to take them away. Lex was curious about why the duo came without Blaine this time around, as he had always accompanied Chen, but they weren't talking about it, so spying on them would not change anything. He took a back seat on things and watched as his staff handled the two guests, to see if there was something he would need to correct. Having a well-trained staff that didn't always require his supervision was extremely important. And now that those two had arrived, he expected more guests would start arriving shortly as well. He was correct, though he could not have guessed who his next guest was. It was Aisha, one of the few guests that Lex had completely missed. She arrived at the inn, looking a little forlorn. Lex was quite curious about this guest of his. Not only did she leave a surplus of 10,855 MP at the inn, she and her counterpart were probably the ones who enjoyed the inn the most. Lex had watched a playback of them flying around the inn, enjoying themselves. Such youthful spirit was something Lex greatly appreciated. He checked her status once before approaching her. Name, Aisha Shezad. Age, 15. Sex, female. Cultivation details, none. Species, human. Midnight and prestige level, 1. Welcome guest, to the Midnight Inn. I am the innkeeper, owner of this humble establishment. I greatly regret missing your previous arrival. I hope you found our services to be adequate. Aisha was surprised to see the innkeeper, and for a moment forgot about her worries. So this was the mystery man behind this mysterious dating spot. "It's a pleasure to meet you," she replied politely. "Your services were excellent, and I was very happy that someone appreciates the universe's needs for romantic getaways." Lex chuckled at Aisha's strange focus. He had seen how Aisha called the inn a dating spot last time she came. It seemed the teenager's mind was completely focused on romance. Alas, even with such romantic places to visit, the heart is left cold and hollow without his warm embrace, Aisha said as dramatically as she could manage. She even turned away from Lex, as if to hide tears in her eyes. The act would have been quite convincing if Aisha hadn't caught sight of Little Blue, swimming slowly across the sky. The turtle was using Little Blue's tie as a leash to walk, swim, no fly? The turtle was using the leash to lead the whale across the sky, and anyone would be stuck in a daze at such a sight. "That's Little Black, our gardener, and Little Blue, its pet. Why don't I introduce you, Lex said, leading the young girl towards the two animals wearing a smug smile. Lex had forgotten that he was being silently observed by his bodyguard, who was taking everything in with a lot of interest. He did not understand what this place was, or what the innkeeper's purpose was. Was he just playing around? But the innkeeper did not seem like a simple person, there had to be a deeper meaning behind his actions. From what he could tell, he was running some kind of hotel. Maybe this was a kind of cultivation? Or maybe it was some kind of organization. But what was the goal? So far, he had only seen the innkeeper interact with low-leveled cultivators. Admittedly, the bodyguard was surprised when he saw the galactic sovereign turtle, but it was still young and weak. It would be tens of thousands of years before the turtle had any kind of real strength. System, scan the inn for anomalies, the bodyguard said in his mind. Sorry host, for the duration of the quest, to maintain the client's privacy, the system's scan capabilities have been sealed. Interesting, the bodyguard said once again. He scanned the inn himself with his spiritual sense, but found nothing out of the ordinary except the mystery trial. For some reason, he felt a slight attraction to the trial, but the attraction was so slight that it clearly meant it had no significant impact on his strength or cultivation. Intrigued, the bodyguard continued to keep watch over his new client. The bodyguard was patient, and didn't mind waiting to learn more secrets. After all, since the quest would forcefully erase his memory, that meant that at some point the bodyguard would be exposed to great secrets. He was very curious to see what those secrets were, and if they were worth having a bad hair day over. Chapter 100 d'Inquest. Lex walked Aisha to the turtle, entertained by her amazed gaze. The young girl had already forgotten that she was supposed to be sad, or maybe she was hiding it. Lex wondered if he would see her counterpart, the young man. The last time they came, the inn was comparatively bare. This time the couple would have many more options for their date. Lex especially wanted them to row the small boat on the tiny lake he created. He did not know why, but Lex was looking forward to it. Little Black, I'd like to introduce you to a guest. This is Aisha. The turtle turned his head towards the little girl, then slowly brought its head down to her level to get a better look at her. Hello, little human. How are you today? You can talk, she gasped in surprise, and then looked at the flying whale with eager eyes. Can he talk too? Little Blue is shy, said the turtle, looking up at it like a proud parent. But if you become friends with it, maybe he'll talk to you. The turtle lowered the whale's tie and offered it to her. Would you like to try? Aisha grabbed onto the tie instantly, and was about to speak when she was whisked off her feet by the whale. The turtle was too heavy for the whale to pull up, but the girl had no choice but to get pulled into the air. At first she let out a surprised scream, but that quickly turned into laughter as the whale pulled her around. She yelled out to purchase another pair of Icarus wings, and a card appeared in her hand with a picture of the wings on it since her previous ones had been used up. She quickly equipped it and started flying around with the whale, challenging it. She flew in front of it and did a loop-de-loop, as if showing off. The whale, not to be outdone, started swirling its body as it swam through the air. The pair flew in between the sky lanterns, using them as obstacles. Lex smiled as he watched them in the air. He immediately took a liking to Aisha, she was a good kid. Turning his attention back to the turtle he said, Little Black, we'll be having a lot of guests coming soon. Make sure no one gets into the greenhouse, it would be a waste if someone ruined all those plants. Also, I'd like it if you could plant vines of Tiffany's treasure all around the inn. They smell nice. The turtle looked at him once before turning away, murmuring, silly, silly human, as it went. Lex didn't mind. He knew the turtle would do as he said. The past few days the turtle and the gardener had done tremendous work, and Lex had gathered a large supply of spirit vegetables, ready to serve his guests. Naturally, anything they ordered that was spirit food would cost more than normal food, but he never doubted that they would order it. Only a short while later, Hera and Will entered the inn along with her son, Jimmy. The young boy did not look too surprised to be appearing in a random new place, he was hiding behind his mother and holding her hand, focusing on staying close to her. Lex's eyes lit up when he saw them, more specifically, when he saw Hera. He noticed the last time she came that she had a keen eye and sharp mind. She was helping Will in expanding his Rose Society's operations, but Lex felt that her talent was being wasted. This was not a decision he intended to make quickly or lightly, but he kept an eye on her as a potential employee for later on. Eventually, when the size of the inn grew, he would need someone to help him manage certain portions of it. He had to observe how well she managed the Rose Society, and if she performed well it would help his decision. Welcome back, he said, approaching them. I see you brought along a new guest today. I hope you enjoy yourself. Lex smiled, and handed the young boy a piece of chocolate. The chocolate was wrapped in a golden and silver wrapper with the initials MI on it. It was a little something he added to the inn earlier, so that he could have the system leave chocolate on the guest's pillow after the turndown service. The chocolate would automatically taste like whatever chocolate the guest preferred. There was no other benefit to it, but Lex liked the idea. Jimmy hesitated, but when his mother encouraged him he took the chocolate and nodded at the innkeeper as thanks. Lex smiled at the shy boy, before turning his attention back to Hera and Will. "Congratulations are in order, I see you've restarted your cultivation journey," he said to Will. Looking at Will's status, Lex could see that he had once again entered the chi training stage. "Thank you, I could not have done it without your help and guidance," the old man said sincerely. Only he knew how truly grateful he was to Lex for freeing him from the pain he'd been feeling for the better part of his life. "It is my duty to help my guests the best I can. Speaking of which, I think you should visit our guild room. I think you will find it very interesting. You can find it on the main street." "I definitely will. I would also like to rent a courtyard for a week. I intend on hosting a few guests here before the event begins." "Of course, you are most welcome. Velma, please show Will to his courtyard and help him with anything else that he needs." Velma appeared in the signature Midnight Way, which was out of thin air, and led the trio towards the manor. The system naturally charged Will the 1400 MP cost, and Lex was not bothered at all by the details of how the transaction took place. He had to say, that was one of his favorite parts about the system. Will and Hera immediately noticed that the environment was different this time around, as not only did it look more festive as compared to its usual peaceful appearance, suited guards could be seen walking around in the distance. They were not sure how strong the guards were, but it was easily apparent that they were much stronger than Will's bodyguard Hugo. It seemed the inn had undergone a lot of changes for the upcoming meeting. They were also more curious about the guild room now, since a suggestion by the innkeeper himself could not be simple. The reason Lex had guided them towards the guild room was because he knew they wanted to trade and so would find the features of the room helpful. More importantly, Lex would receive 1% of all transactions that occurred in the guild room, so he was completely shameless about promoting it to his guests. It appeared as though some of his usual guests were arriving a little early and would wait here for the meeting, but Lex did not mind that at all. A short while later, Alexander and Helen also entered the inn. Lex was a little surprised to see him without his family, as he was expecting them to come. Perhaps they would join later. "Welcome back," Lex said warmly, smiling at Helen. It must be said that he had gotten so used to her being at the inn, the past few days almost felt strange with her gone. "Thank you, it feels good to be back," she responded. Her response was not perfunctory either. After spending so much time here she had forgotten how dilute the spiritual energy and polluted the air on Earth was. She almost felt suffocated there. "We'd like to rent a courtyard for the next couple of weeks," Helen said. Although in all technicality Alexander was the one who needed to rent a courtyard for his family, he had achieved prestige level 3 with his previous transaction at the gift shop. He felt it would be better if he got others to carry out the following transactions so everyone could raise their prestige level, as the perks were very useful. "Of course," Lex said, summoning one of the newer AI staff members to lead the duo. "By the way, you have guests waiting for you in the guild room, the ones from Vegas Minima. They're earlier than we were expecting. I will go see them soon. By the way, my grandfather will be joining us later, but he had a question he wanted me to ask. Instead of renting rooms, is it possible to buy a permanent room at the inn?" Lex was surprised by the question, as he had never considered guests wanting to buy a permanent room, but he supposed the Morrison family's vision was naturally beyond that of ordinary guests. Before he could answer though, he heard the familiar sound of a system notification. "Id enquest activated."